Welcome everybody to the Imperial 80s. I still gotta figure out how to add in the intro video back since I had to delete it for something last week. But good to be with you, Mtume. How are you doing?
Doing good, doing good. Glad to be here. We're talking about a very, very, very interesting entry into 80s comedies. Oh wow.
Yeah, 80s comedies, 80s definitely like a real children's movie. I don't know how many real children's movies that we've. That's maybe debatable, but it was huge among kids.
hmm
And I don't really know. Yeah, we'll talk about that as we talk about some of the humor and stuff like that of is this a teen movie? Is it a kids movie? Not
A
really
tween,
sure.
what a tween movie, maybe? I don't know. I mean, I
Yeah.
I definitely saw it when I was like a kid, but
Yeah, me
the
too.
80s are also just weird, I think, in that the lightheartedness they kind of generalized. We'll talk about this. So, it's like general audience kidness, but within that comes like things that are for like little kids and then things that are like for KG boy teenagers.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that they didn't make toys for this movie. I think it probably speaks to the lack of actual technology at the time that to make a toy that would have been You know, you woulda had to make, like, a plastic Johnny 5, and it's like, who wants that, you know? But anyway, we'll get into it. So, yeah, I guess we could just start right out with memories of these films. These films were a very big deal in the '80s, and we will get into a lot of they do some very nefarious, but also kind of interesting ideological work for the ruling class, specifically around robots and artificial intelligence. That I think was maybe the only really interesting thing about rewatching these films, at least from
hmm
a kind of critical lens. I rewatched them with my 8-year-old last week as well, which do not recommend, and we can talk about that a little bit. But and I will quickly give the review of my 8-year-old, which he had a more um, crass, unedited version of this, but he did not want that stated on live for mass consumption. So he gave me an official statement, which was everyone has to agree that Short Circuit 2 is way, 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 way better than Short Circuit 1. So that's my 8-year-old's official analysis of the two films. Um, but yeah, I'll put that aside and we'll get into it more, I think, as we talk about this movie. We're probably not going to go super in depth on all of this movie today because there's just a lot of really foolishness and silliness that's, I think in some levels is like kind of beneath analysis other than talking about in kind of general terms. Um, but as a kid, I loved these movies. I did. And I mean, this one is interesting, and Tume and I have talked a little bit about, one versus two. They're obviously the only thing that's really consistent is well, there's two things. It's um it's Johnny Five, who in the first one is mostly called number five until the very end, which is the robot. Um, and then Ben, which is the, like, most problematic of all of the representations for a variety of reasons, including one I did not know until last week when I was, like, revisiting the chat and stuff like that after our conversation on Goonies, which is that he's played in brownface by the dude from Success, like, the lawyer from Succession, basically. Which is just my mind was blown. I'm sending him to me like the blown brain emojis in the in the chat because it's very obvious that it's a racist representation when you watch it of uh a Hindu, an Indian person, right? Um, but I didn't fully. I kind of it's hard to imagine, but this still happened in the 80s in a few different examples. But this has got, I mean, when we get through all of these 80s films, we can kind of do we need to do like a top 5 most racist things that happened in the 80s. This is in the top 5, right? Because you literally brown faced this dude up.
For
He's
2
a
movies.
for
It
2
wasn't just 1
movies.
movie, and in the second one, you made him, like, the co-lead.
The star. Yeah, he's the star with Johnny. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, in certain ways, yeah, and I know the actor has apologized and all of that, which I mean he had to.
Yeah, but also, like, reluctantly, because like, that apology came after, like, years of, like, self-defense over it, of
Mm,
saying people are, like, too sensitive. Oh, we made sure to not make it, like, offensive, right? Even though it's brown face. I mean, really,
it's so offensive.
it took like 20 years for them to go, yeah, maybe, and then make all this apologia that they wouldn't have done it after. I mean, literally, the director said that like people were overly sensitive, and when they got their initial criticism, because like I think one of the other things is like sometimes it's painted that like criticism came later, but no, the criticism was there from day one, and they deflected the criticism. So that's what I think making Short Circuit 2 is even that more disgusting. That they
Yeah.
got the criticism and they said, well, fuck y'all. Y'all too sensitive. We're going to do it again because we made $40 million on a $12 million picture.
Yeah. It's awful. And it's interesting too. I mean, because one of the people I went to actually undergrad with was Hari Kondabalu, who did like the "What's Wrong with Apu," like that this kind of and it really made me at the time that he was like raising those critiques of the representations of South Asian Indian people in Hollywood and on TV and so on. Um, I hadn't really spent that much time like thinking about it before I started to hear him, but it's bad. It's really, really, really bad. And yeah, this movie is atrocious in that vein. So anyway, as a kid, not conscious of that, not conscious of it until my 40s. Um, Other than recognizing that, yeah, like it's clear even if it was played by an Indian actor, right, that it is a form of like minstrelsy essentially, right? So there's that. But as a kid, like the robot is really the thing more than anything. And you know, lasers, very big deal in the 80s again. I know we've said this multiple times on this series, but it has to be emphasized how important lasers are to the brain of children in the 80s. It was like the most amazing thing ever. And Johnny Five had a laser, could blow anything up with it. Um, and just this idea, right, of the possibility, which is the thing that I think is maybe really most relevant and interesting today, is this possibility of artificial intelligence, right? And this possibility, not even so much of artificial intelligence, but of this idea of, you know, a robot being able to really develop genuine consciousness, which is this is something that actually is spoken about in the film in interesting ways because Steve Gutenberg's character actually kind of represents somewhat accurately the like argument that would be raised by technologists around this of well actually it can't do xyz, it's just computation and programming, right? um and so Dwayne Monroe was like heavily, and I asked him about it when we did our thing on Friday, heavily in my brain as I was watching this too. So anyways, as we get to some of that we can talk about that, but as a kid, yeah, both of these movies, I think I probably partially agree. I think I probably watched Short Circuit 2 more times myself also, but I watched both of them in the 80s. These were okay, my parents gave these the check mark of approval. Um, and what else do I wanna say? I don't know. I think that's fine for now. I watched them a lot. Oh, this one obviously again is set in Oregon and they reference Oregon. So also growing up there, it just had like a little the first one, I think for that reason, had a little bit of staying power for us because it was like, oh, like, they're in our world, is kind of the way you think about it as a kid, right? Which if you grow up in Oregon, there's not a lot of things that you're going to find on TV or in the movies where they're trying to represent your state, basically.
I mean, y'all had the Goonies and Short Circuit.
Yeah,
Y'all was
there's more
rocking.
Free
Rambo,
Willy.
Free Willy, y'all rocking. Y'all was rocking more than some other states. Straight up. Yeah, same. Short Circuit was a kind of like piece, like Star Wars or Rambo, like the kind of like duo series of the movies were like these things that you had to see. The obsession with the robot, right? Like, and the idea of like an intelligent robot, in the 80s, and what RoboCop would come like the next year, Blade Runner. It's like in the zeitgeist, coming out of Star Wars too. Also thinking about C3PO um and all this idea of like, the robot future, and one day we'd have intelligent robots that will be able to like be like people. I think it was all just very cool. I was a comic book reader, so Vision, you know what I'm saying? Like all this shit is like stuff that's like part of like your kind of youth. So to kind of have this like kiddie, kind of funny, constantly pop culture referencing robot, which I think is a big thing to talk about with the kind of like creation of Johnny Five, is part of it. Yeah, I watched 2 a lot more. My theory, and this is not a real studied theory, is that 2 was a financial failure. And I remember I did not have a copy of either of these movies, but I remember 2 would always be on cable. So I think because there's probably such a failure, they probably wanted to recoup their money, so they probably had a good cable package,
Why
you
did it
know?
fail? Like, I don't like.
Well, Ali Sheedy and Gutenberg aren't in it. They said Sheedy was too expensive, which is funny. And Gutenberg turned it down because they didn't have a script. He says he regrets it. He said he should have done it anyway. Yeah, because by that point Gutenberg's career was hitting the slide. So um, but and I think I don't know, maybe it just didn't. I mean, I think also we sometimes have to wonder like why was the first one successful? Sometimes they're just like opportune moments. Like I think people maybe overestimate. Hollywood likes to overestimate successes. Well, let's make a sequel, make it in 2 years, and we're gonna have no script, and we're just gonna, and then put them in the city. Yeah, right. It'll work. And the next thing you know, audiences are like, I'm not really into that.
It worked for me, Mtube.
Worked for me too. It worked for me too, but I guess for everybody else it didn't. I mean, so the clear answer was I don't know. And then also, 2 years are big. 88, maybe because we had RoboCop the next year, right? So by that point, the cute robot was out. The robot that could shoot the guns, you know what I'm saying, and take out people in the city of Detroit was in, right? And that's how quickly things go in and out. So I watched it a lot when I was a kid. Probably when I was about a teenager, I probably got out of it. It wasn't interesting to me. I became aware of the Fisher Stevens thing. It was a homie who put it on to me in a conversation about we were having like a black face, brown face, yellow face, and it was like, yeah, like the short circuit dude. And like I kind of went like this. I was like, what? And it was like, I was like, yo, right? Oh my god, he's a white dude. I remember them telling me. So it was in my consciousness from there, from like a casual conversation. Because when I was a kid, I had no like recollection of it. Like I just, it was I took it at face value, for lack of a better a pun. Um, um, Go
It's
ahead.
fascinating too because he actually like doesn't really like look like
No.
I mean, like
Yeah. I know what you mean with like the beard. I mean, we can. Yeah.
I'll pull up some photos for
Yeah.
folks so they
I
can
mean,
see.
when you talk about it, when I was reading about them doing it, like they went through a lot. They did a lot of stuff to like really make his face, and I mean, it looks really bad and looks terrible, and it's not like a good thing, but it's like they did so much to like try to kind of pass it through that it's like it's fascinating. Um, as he's pulling up, one thing that did happen many years later that I think is really relevant to the AI part of this. So, an ex of mine is actually a roboticist. And some years ago, I was watching the anime series Neon Genesis Evangelion, and she had saw the DVD box that I had, and she chuckled. And I was like, "What are you laughing at?" She was like, "You like this stuff?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think it's fun." She was like, "This stuff like is like what gives everyone the wrong ideas of robots and intelligence and all that type of stuff." And I was like, "Oh, word!" Like, and we talked about it once. Um, and then she did literally bring up Short Circuit, and she says whenever she's worked on robots, like people who don't know shit, they go, "Oh, Johnny Five," and she says like it gets her so annoyed, and like the Johnny Five references, and she says like these, and it's like kind of like similar to what like Dwayne Monroe says about this, the pop culture understanding or misunderstanding of science, of robotics, of computational, technologies and so forth and so on, that it's created this concept that's so hard when you're trying to explain what robotics is, what intelligence is, what artificial intelligence, quote unquote, could and should or can or can never be. It's hard to have conversations. And she said, this is even amongst people in academia, like when she would have to go like prove things for grants or have conversations with people who are part of like different conferences, that like she's always kind of like going up against people who believe more in these bad culture references. So she was saying like, yeah, like she's like, her and her friends, when they watch it, they would watch things like this, they would watch it and laugh at how silly it was, and it's how much nonsense it was. So I remember when that happened. It was like years ago. This is before like the big AI boom that we have now. It always kind of stayed in my mind. So when the AI kind of thing came, her voice and now Dwayne's voice and some other people's voices kind of sit in my head as a kind of like shaking my head. So yeah, that's kind of where these films like situate for me. And just like, I guess one other thing that I'll say, and I would like to bring this in, is just the nature of the 80s comedy and the kind of like churning out of movies as just a kind of like factory. Like we have to have a certain amount of movies every year. We need a couple of comedies. We need another Steve Gutenberg vehicle. Let's just develop these things. And because you get this like honestly crap, like just crap that's just slapped together. And when you even read about the production, it's not to say that the people who worked on it aren't like highly skilled. There are some like interesting people who worked on it that we'll talk about it. But like the fact that like highly skilled people are making Johnny Five movies, are making Short Circuit, is like it's such a point about how commodity production works in America. It's absurd. It's an absurd reality.
Are you saying that we don't need Short Circuit movies, Mtume? Like we don't need Steve Gutenberg vehicles? Like what
I, I
what is
can
the argument?
I can say with all of my body that if Steve Gutenberg never happened, and if Johnny Five movies never happened, the world would have been better off. Well, I'll say this indefinitely with Police Academy. The world would have been much better without that.
We got to get to Police Academy
Oh
soon.
fuck yeah! And I don't know how we're gonna do that because I don't know if we should just watch a bunch of them and squeeze them in. I don't know. That's gonna be very difficult to figure out. But that's a side conversation.
It's interesting in some respect because this movie is almost like another Police Academy movie. Like they basically were like, let's make it Police Academy 4.5, but throw in a robot.
Right? Exactly. Exactly. It's hilarious.
Because just for folks who don't know, like it's not just Steve Guttenberg that's in the film, but it's also what is his name?
His name is I have it right here. It is oh gosh, I just had it. Where is it? His name is G.W. Bailey.
G.W. Bailey.
Yeah, who played what's his name in the he's the main antagonist always in the Police Academy movies.
Yeah, hang on. He's Thaddeus Harris, Lieutenant Thaddeus Harris in the Police Academy. He's Scroder in this film, which of course is intentionally close to scrotum so that it gets said at one point in the film, which gives you an idea of how brilliant 80s comedy.
They was really flipping the disses there, man. They were really, really good.
Oh man. All right. So yeah, go through the people, man.
So we can go through the people. Well, I think the most interesting also is the director. So this film is directed by John Badham. Now Badham has an interesting career, which he directly references within the movie, which we'll have to get into.
Saturday Night Fever.
Okay, yeah, which we'll have to get into. So he's the director of Saturday Night Fever, which might be his most famous film, but it's not his only. He also directed Blue Thunder, which we really should do. Yeah. That's a really interesting militarism film.
Yeah,
militarism in the cities and war games as well, which we also will do. He did other movies like Stakeout, Bird on a Wire. You know, he did. Oh gosh, right. He did do Point of No Return, the La Femme Nikita American remake, which is really bad. Though I'm not a big fan of La Femme Nikita either. But so he does a lot of movies. He's kind of, I would characterize him as a very typical Hollywood movie maker who kind of does the job that they intend him to do. He's not remarkable in any kind of ways, but in this way, because he's part of these like seminal quote unquote parts of like pop culture history, he likes to play into it, like referencing two of your own movies, Saturday Night Fever, and he also references Blue Thunder in the movie, is like a self-awareness that like dawns on a level of arrogance and like self-importance that I'm just like, dude, homie, it ain't that deep, right? You know, like you don't have any ideas, so you just reference your old movie to kind of make it seem, you know, hip. So he is the filmmaker behind this. So he didn't conceive of it. He was eventually brought on. The interesting thing about the origin of this movie is that I've seen two different stories, which leaves me a bit suspicious about how this movie got about. One story that I've seen is that it was initially conceived by the two writers, who are the two credited writers, Brent Maddock and S.S. Wilson, when they were at UCLA Film School. It was part of their writing class, and they came up with it, and apparently it was much darker before, and then they came with different ideas, and then eventually it got into Hollywood, right? The second story that I've seen, though, is that there was a kind of market research thing that the producers did about robots amongst audiences at various colleges. And they took that different market research about, like, you know, where they would study different, they would asking people questions about, you know, living robots, and what if a robot came alive? What would you think? And things like that. And they captured it on video, and then they eventually extrapolated this, and this became within the machinations of Hollywood into a movie. So these two different origin stories don't really line up. And I've seen both. which leads me to believe it's probably closer to the second. And these guys were hired. Maybe they did have an idea, but there was definitely some kind of like hodgepodging of the entire thing that I think happened personally. It's a little
It's a horribly written film.
and it's
Like,
also really bad. It's also really badly
yeah.
written. So it seems to your point, Jay, it almost feels like it's mushed together. And they said, well, let's get a couple of guys to kind of manage it at some point, right? Because then you also have the post of the script when they bring in the designers, which we'll talk about in a second, which then adds another thing. So it like if these guys did a lot of the work, I'm sure they probably spec'd it out and like put together a structure that was later destroyed and reworked by the director, so forth and so on. It's all really weird. Like when I read even the personal accounts, they're all very like piecemeal. Like no one, like a lot of times when we're looking at these movies, the line of like creation is a lot clearer. This one is very, 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 very vague and like all over the place.
Yeah, and the film has that vibe to it. Like it works for kids because it's like we were so primed for a robot, and there's jokes that are probably like we know we shouldn't really be hearing, and that kind of stuff. But it when you watch it to try to just sort of follow like what's the narrative arc here, what's the plot, like what's going on story wise and stuff like that in this film, like it's
Yeah.
just it literally is just kind of like, okay, they threw a whole bunch of spaghetti at the wall and then just picked what they were like gonna, put into the final cut, basically.
Yeah, I mean, there's a comment from the director Badham that apparently Johnny Five had more lines, but when he did his first big test screening, he was so annoyed by how much he was speaking that he had to cut like something like 30% of his dialogue. Like it was, they said it was like so annoying. Even test audiences were like, "What is this? This is like way too much." So another couple of people to highlight is a guy named Sid Mead. And Sid Mead is like a really interesting figure in like industrial design, but then that goes into movies. So he used to do a lot of industrial design for like US Steel, Ford Motor Company. He was like a really he's kind of a luminary, even in things like Germany. If you follow his like career, you can go down a really big rabbit hole of like Sid Mead and his whole stuff. But then he also eventually transitioned into movies, and he was doing kind of both, which is interesting if you start thinking about big capital, right? And then movie world and how they kind of mesh. I don't have any like big conclusions as much as it could be an interesting thing to like track through if people want to do some interesting research in like in industry, large big industry, big capital, and in movie making. I mean, Sid Mead did some of the design of Blade Runner for Tron. I think he did some of he's either directly an inspiration or he did some actual work on even some of the machine stuff in Aliens, right? He's a figure in this way. And another guy, there's two other people, is Eric Allard. He was another designer. I think he did a lot of the actual work on creating the Johnny Five, and it was also influenced. And I've never seen it. Douglas Trumbull, he has a short called Let's Go, and they said the Johnny Five thing was like taken a lot from the Douglas Trumbull thing. And Douglas Trumbull's another one. If people know his name, he did a lot of special effects for things like 2001 Space Odyssey, Close Encounters. I think also Blade Runner. Right. So there's a lot of these kinds of people who kind of like worked on like the Johnny Five thing that apparently like the movie, they didn't spend a lot of money on the movie except for Johnny Five. It was like tons and tons of money because also like you had the like robots that looked like him. They apparently sometimes at a time like 15 people had to move it at once. It was like a really like highly complex, and that's what I'm saying. I'm like, they're doing all this massive labor for this. Like the amount of labor that's happening for Short Circuit is just, it's just kind of mind-boggling. Uh yeah. The other thing, I mean, so the other people to kind of like highlight is are some of the actors. So we talked about Ali Sheedy. This is like kind of peak power time for Ali Sheedy. She's about a year off of The Breakfast Club, which we'll do at some point, which was huge. Um, and it's funny if you look at Ali Sheedy's like early career, she was just in like kind of like big film after big film. I mean, she starts with Bad Boys, which we definitely have to do with Sean Penn. Um, War Games, she's in, so she's in the other John Badham film. She's in that's like her second film, and then like she's in The Breakfast Club and St. Elmo's Fire in the same year. So it's like a mega thing, and she becomes this like mega person. So she's really, if you think about it, like she's the top billed star of the movie, right? She's like the kind of like catch star of the movie, bringing in, and this is kind of like the peak. You know, it's interesting to think about how a lot of it's particularly like the women in the Brat Pack, they had these like peak moments mid to like late '80s, and then once like the '90s turned around, it kind of just flipped for them, in their careers. And then the other one is Steve Guttenberg, which like the Steve Guttenberg industrial complex, man. I mean, this guy at this point was just like he was rocking, and it's one of those like happenings in Hollywood that like I don't know if you can really crack the nugget when we get into his acting and how bad it is, and how the dude has this like constant smile at all times, which I think is probably part of the reason why he became so famous. I have to admit it kind of pisses me off, but like I guess people reacted to it all the time. This is like, you know, when he was really bankable. It's a little bit after, where did I have? It's a little bit after Police Academy 1, right? Actually, and 2. He had 2. 3 comes out the same year as this, right? Because he only went up to 4 in the Police Academy movies. I think Cocoon was probably a big deal. Cocoon was a massive hit, right? So like Cocoon, he's in that. Um, he's in things like Diner, so forth and so on. These things are like really, you know, big for a movie like this, someone who has this kind of like leverage. But one of the things that it makes me think about with the movie with someone like Gutenberg is like how they want to paint the scientist as a kind of reluctant, um, complicit attachment to militarism. So they want the scientists, and they'll do the same thing with Fisher Stevens playing in Brownface, as a kind of, they really have no other place to go with their skill sets. So they're kind of thrown into this world of military. So, hey, that's what they do. But they always, in the end, choose goodness, right? They always, in the end, when something is proven, something like an outside person or the actual robot or something like that proves to have a greater potential than they even could conceive, they will always go on the side of like, the good thing. And like, I think that has a lot of dangerous mileage to actual history when we think about actual scientists, or people who worked in all types of stuff, theorists, It's kind of the similar shit they did with what's his name in A Beautiful Mind. John Nash, trying to like not really paint him as a really xenophobic, racist, pro empire hawk that he was. That movie did all it could to try to like say if he had any kind of paranoia, Cold War paranoia, that it was more had to do with his, whatever kind of mental challenges he had. Right. It was more of a result of that. But no, if you read about Nash, that dude was an imperialist all the freaking way.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It's maybe a way to kind of move into the film a little bit, because on one level, I think there's something revealing about that, and I think there's quite a bit that's revealing within this film. in that I do think for people who get into science and the high tech world and all of this, that there's some truth to the fact that within empire, most of the time you're going to be doing imperialist stuff, right? And like, and this is like kind of the qualitative difference too between being a scientist within empire versus like being a scientist in an anti-imperialist country. Like I think about like Iran, right? Like there's something quite different, I think, about the women engineers who are building missiles to defend their country in Iran versus like Steve Gutenberg developing death robots for the Pentagon. um but I mean, obviously they're both doing the same thing, right? They're both doing like science in this kind of way, but there's kind of there's really no possibility with an empire that you could be doing kind of life affirming work within the sphere of something like robotics, right? I mean, maybe you could, within the medical field or within like, you get into like some of the biomed stuff, but it's still going to be, totally bound up in the capitalist system and in profit considerations and all of that stuff. It's not really going to be truly life affirming, right? And so I think that's an interesting thing, and it does play out. And I think you're right in terms of like the propaganda piece around that is to convince people that like, yeah, you might have to go work for the Pentagon, but if one of your robots develops real human feelings, you can take it to your ranch in Montana and nobody will care that you stole an $11 million robot, and you won't go to prison for the rest of your life for treason or whatever would actually happen, right? And so yeah, sorry not to give away the ending, but I just did. But anyway, uh, so it starts out right, and you get the kind of it's like a factory scene, right? Of like the production of the robot, this like very 80s music. Also, we'll have to talk. People singing the El DeBarge song in the chat. M2 didn't really remember that. It was a moment for me. El DeBarge, who's Johnny.
And I'm
Um,
a barge dude, but that track doesn't track for me. But I'm a Last Dragon to barge is probably what hits me the most.
Maybe because the film was from Oregon, they played it on our local radio station way more. I don't know. But uh, you get this, and then you get the really the first scene that it gets into. It's kind of fascinating, right? Because you have the robots, which the one that we follow through this movie is number 5, right? Particularly, but that's just it's like a serial number, right? It's just like his number in the assembly line, basically. Um, and you see tanks rolling in, you see armored personnel carriers rolling in, and the robots are the axis of resistance, right? They're in bunkers with lasers and they're blowing up tanks and armored personnel carriers and jeeps, right? And you see all of these dummies, like crash test dummies, like burning from their
And did you
lasers.
notice that the vans all had red stars on them?
Ah,
Yeah,
I didn't notice that. So they're supposed to
they
be
all had red
Soviet.
stars. Yeah, yeah, they all had red stars on them. So I was like, there's definitely the clear, and they invoke a
Yes,
Soviet kind of thing a little bit in a few scenes later.
they do, right? Once you get down to like the kind of sales pitch, right? So anyways, they show this, and then you get all of these military figures like, Pentagon officials basically that are there. This is a demonstration that you're seeing, right? So I mean, right off the bat, they're setting up that this company, Nova is the name of it, is a military technology company. It's a private enterprise, right? But it is designed to build robots and sell them. It's a defense contractor, essentially, right? Um, and so, you get that. You get what's the name of the actor who plays the guy who does the sales pitch, like kind of their boss.
Austin
Um,
Pendleton.
Austin Pendleton. Okay.
Austin
So
Pendleton, yeah, who's done quite a few things. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. He was a pretty big, kind of character actor
Mhm.
in the 80s especially. Um, so he's giving the kind of presentation, right? And then it starts to rain. That's the thing. And so they're like, "Oh crap, we got to move these robots inside," basically. So they're like, "All right, let's move it all inside." And it's a big cocktail party. It's like a schmooze fest. They're wining and dining these defense contractors because they want to sell these very expensive robots, which we learn later on that they're worth $11 million a piece, which, in 1986 is, I don't even know what the comparison is today, but it's at least like double that, right?
Short Circuit was made for $14 million in that
Yeah.
same year. So one of these machines is the equivalent of making this entire film in this kind
Yeah.
of, story they're making.
Which, I mean, it's also just absolutely nuts. And we probably should do a zoom out conversation at some point about how much money Hollywood just throws into these propaganda, into this industry of propaganda for us, but also for the projection of American ideology, internationally, really, which is probably even more of its purpose in some cases than the domestic audience. But you, yeah, you get the cocktail party. Number 5, so there's, like, kinda 2 different things going on at this point. There's the cocktail party inside, the people who work for Nova are whining and dining and trying to sell. One of the Pentagon officials wants to meet Steve Guttenberg's character because he's the one who actually designed the robots, and she wants to talk to him. And he's reluctant, right? He doesn't like that side of things, right? He's just a scientist, like you said. He just wants to, do his robotics work. He's a genius, right? Leave me alone and you do the PR stuff, basically. But it alongside this, you get the only reason I'm laying all this out really is because you get this important moment where number 5 is struck. Well, the generator he's attached to is struck by lightning. Um, and of course, the guys who are out there supposed to take care of it are really freaked out because they're like, "Oh no, we just zapped an $11 million robot," and so they go over to it immediately. Which also, I was like, that seems not safe. You're gonna start touching a robot that's just been struck by lightning. Um, but whatever, they do that. They disconnect it from the generator, and they realize, okay, it's fine. Somehow, it absorbed all of this. Uh, you know, however many million volts or whatever lightning strike is, and there seems to be no ill effects to the robot. And then they're like, okay, we'll move them inside. And this is where you get the realization that number 5, something's off with number 5. It's not following the strict kind of orders that it's been given by these folks of like how, all the other robots are moving like single file line, following a path, right? And number 5 starts to like sneak around and try to think about how can I get out of here, basically. So that's kind of like how it all sets up. I mean, it's extremely silly, right? Like this is again for children. Like this idea that a lightning strike is going to, I mean, what we find soon is that it produces consciousness within uh number 5 or Johnny, that this robot somehow develops consciousness. And so that's central motivating theme of the whole movie. I mean, I think the poster, which I have in the background, actually says it. Number 5 is alive, right? Which is kind of the slogan that number 5 says throughout the film. And so that sets up the basic,
Yeah.
issue.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like curious like, sub themes that kind of like pop out of that. Like, I mean, one is the consistent thing in the 80s, and it probably didn't start in the 80s, but in the 80s, there is this like concept where we're going to have this really kind of subtle but very, I think, limp critique of privatization and militarizations and state militarizations relationship, right? And they always want to kind of produce a I would say a nefarious read amongst them, but not, but the nefarious read is not what they're doing to the global South or what imperialism in a really kind of like way that we understand it as anti-imperialists. It's in this like moral kind of way, right? Like these people are heavy-handed. There's like a line later where Ali Sheedy's, oh my god, they're so severe, right? When she's speaking of them, like the fact that they're just so abundant with like guns and militarism, that's just really bad, right? Like they don't need to be so aggressive is like the comment, right? And we see it with RoboCop or many other movies, Blue Thunder, War. I don't know if War Games has a private end. I think War Games, they're all military. It's been a while though. I could forget, but Blue Thunder definitely has that. That kind of thought, right? So that these types of things, thinking about the privatization, but yeah, like I said, the critique is very weak, right? And even using someone like Austin Pendleton, you know, he comes off as a kind. He says it. I used to be into the science, now I'm into the money, right? And it's just very kind of what the thing is, right? I'm just into the money, and in a way that Americans think have just lost their morals. That's the issue. We've lost our kind of moral compass, and because we've lost our moral compass, we're doing shady deals with various things, or creating things that could cause like little bits of destruction, right? Um, so there's that. There's definitely also there's like this guy, when he's speaking to one of the potential, I think, people who have to sign off on it, right? He's one of the Pentagon people, and he tells this like joke about, yeah, and we have this one plan with it where if they'll be kind of hanging out on the side, and basically like giving like the doomsday scenario, but he's doing it like over a drink, talking like he's talking about the Knicks game, like
Yeah.
if they just hang back there, they can block every shot, like he's talking about the doomsday scenario, like literally he's giving the NBA Finals game plan. And on one level, like there is that, like I'm sure there is that kind of way about it that these people have, right? When they think about it. I think it's better done in movies like Walter Matthau's character in uh not it's the other 50s nuclear warfare movie where he plays the guy who basically like says we need to like lose half the planet to beat the Soviets, and that'll be the best way. I forget the name
Not
of the movie
Strange
right now.
Love, right?
No, it's the movie that came up. Fail Safe. It's the film that came out the
Okay.
same year as Strange Love, right? That's a better depiction to me of that kind of character, because they actually show how dark it is to be that way. Like it's actually a very dark, evil, kind of way of being. This one they kind of make it like jovial, but to that point, it's like there's like this constant way, even with using G.W. Bailey as like the military leader. You kind of take the bite off of the military a bit. They become more like Keystone cops who probably have too much power to like really know what any good with it, to do anything good with it. And it's the function, I think, of the 80s comedy to, I think, soften our military and our imperialist ways. I think in many like if we think of like Rambo or those things like making us really buy into it, this has like a counter effect where like that probably helps the Rambo, where we end up not taking our militarism that seriously.
Yeah, it's the bumbling. I mean, it helps contribute to the bumbling empire kind of narrative, right? And which is very useful for liberal critiques largely. Like we're seeing a ton of this right now with relation to the war in Iran because it's not going well, right? And so then the argument is like, oh, they just bumbled into this again. Like, and that was used a lot with particularly the Iraq war post 9/11 too, which obviously like there was success, right? And kind of mission accomplished. I mean, not even getting into like the pretext and all the false, the illegalness and all of these aspects of things, right? But like this notion of, okay, you overthrew Saddam, right? You achieved regime change, but then then this like, well, we don't know actually how to govern or to how to even to help Iraqis govern, like, very colonial bullshit. But like, this is that bumbling critique contributes to it. And I think you're right in terms of also connecting it to police academy and seeing these forces deployed in a domestic context, which they are here. It's not even totally clear to me. They seem like so there's a military force. Probably to set this up, we should say a couple of things. So obviously Johnny Five has this death laser, right? So they're concerned obviously not just about the value of the robot, but there's also a concern, and they say this, basically, what if he nukes a bus of nuns, and then Ben's character says nun soup, right? And so that, this is the humor of the 80s. And so uh they have to regain this thing, right? So there's a debate there that I'll read out a little bit of that is somewhat interesting. But mainly there's two forces kind of set up, right? Which is the scientists who want to recover number five from a scientific perspective to understand what's going on. Like, how come it's not following orders? And, they're more interested in it scientifically, what's going on. And then there's the company. There's actually kind of three components of it. There's the company, which is like, we want to recoup our asset, and we're worried about the potential risk of harm that this thing could do. So it's all a financial logic for them, really. And then there's the military side of it. And I think these guys are supposed to be like contractors, but I'm not
Yeah,
really sure.
they're called security, but what I
Yeah,
never was able to figure out is, were they like contracted from the government? Are they like a private thing? I think they also make this shit up
of
also. So
course.
it's like, does it have to
But
be an
it's like
actual
Blackwater
reality?
or whatever. Like, it's like, yeah, Peter
Special
Thiel's
ops,
private army.
retired people. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I mean, but see, for them, like, part of what I see, right, is like, one, they go into like military mode and like this whole like, but also there, which I think is an interesting element of this movie a little bit. There's not a lot that's interesting in this movie, but there's a little bit of a like competition thing, right? Of like, we want to prove that violence work is still the domain of humans and not the domain. We don't want to be outstripped by robots, right? We don't want to be replaced in our violence work duties by robots, right? And so there actually becomes this kind of, they want to kill, they want to destroy the robot. Like, that's their aim in it. And so this kind of sets up the central conflict that you're pulled into as a viewer, right? Between the people who care about science and who are there because it's the only science job for them, and but have some morality somehow, even though they're doing this work for this defense contractor, right? That's building death robots for the Pentagon. And the security force, whatever they are, which is actually threatened by this thing and wants it destroyed, right? And probably would like it if this was able to be used to kind of end the idea of these robots in totality, right? So that's that's the way they set it up. There's one little interesting exchange I'll just repeat here, which is like when they go to Crosby, that's the name of the character played by Gutenberg, um, and Marner, who I think is the defense contractor character. He says, "How can it refuse to turn itself off?" Or no, that's what the Marner is the guy who runs the company, basically. He's like the CEO. He says, "How can it refuse to turn itself off?" And then Schroeder, right? That's the police academy guy, the bad guy. He says, "Maybe it's pissed off." And so then Crosby says, "It's a machine, Schroeder. It doesn't get pissed off. It doesn't get happy. It doesn't get sad. It doesn't laugh at your jokes. It just runs programs." And both he and Ben say that last line together. And then some random guy who I don't think ever appears in the movie again, but certainly not a big role, says, "It usually runs programs." So, and this is also after a moment in which they use, this was another cool 80s thing of like this map, right? They like geolocate, like they have a LoJack on this thing, right? And it's able to like show them on this map like where it is, and they could see it's outside of the area. Again, this was like big 80s, tech stuff for us. You look back on it now and you're like, can they just look at that on a phone or like something like that,
So
but
simple,
yeah.
guys. Come on. Yeah. And to that point, so one of the other things with the sequence is the lightning. And this gets very interesting on two levels. Well, a couple levels. One, it's interesting in how uninteresting it is as a writing concept, because basically, like, how do you drive your movie forward, and you need to kind of create a happening within technology, but you don't want to like actually talk about technology in a real way in the movie. You just have lightning hit the thing and create some kind of, flurry of explosion and suddenly you have existence, right? So it's like script issue solved, right? Just drop some lightning. But to that point, I think this is really informative because I think it really digs into how people in the West tend to think about life, right? And the creation of life. So you need these kinds of unexplained phenomena and metaphysical happening to kind of create and develop life. So this kind of thing happens, and like the kind of like the confluence of events, right? Um that a lightning thing will happen. Johnny Five's generator or whatever is in the right place at the right moment. And it's like, life happened because of this interesting things of the right place at the right moment, which might be true. I'm not a scientist in that kind of way, but this is the way that they want to speak about it. And thus it creates this fundamental happening that can only happen single. And then you go to like the singularity, right? Which people like, who's the Kurzweil are really into. Kurzweil is all about like AI is like the new singularity. It'll create the new, existence and all that type of shit. Which I have to say, and I'd be curious like Dwayne's thoughts on this, because this movie is a lot like what I hear from like Nick Land lovers. This kind of idea that like AI is going to one day have this merge with existence that we'll never be able to explain. It's like they have this weird circular argument that there'll be something unexplainable that will happen, and they're trying to explain to us that there's something unexplainable will happen. Like that doesn't make any fucking sense, because if something unexplainable will happen, then how do you even know that that's going to happen? Like that's like, how are you predicting unexplainable things? That is stupid, right? But these kinds of movies is what this generation was largely like developed watching, right? And and so this lightning bolt happens, it shocks him, and we get this kind of metaphysical happening that creates this like singular life form and this singular individual. Because I find it interesting that the movie is not about how Gutenberg created a series of robots that will eventually meet sentience, but that one robot was able to meet sentience because he had this interesting interaction with the the forces of the universe, and it arrived him. So also in a way, he can only ever be singular, which is like also really, I think, beloved in American individualism. This is a very much an American individualism movie. The idea of the single, super special thing that happens, and that we all must rally around him, yada yada yada, blah blah blah. And we can get more to this a little bit later, because then the next thing that has to happen is really throughout this movie, and also really, I think Short Circuit 2 is mostly about this. How does Johnny Five prove he's living? Like, what is his proof of life, right? How do we convince it? And it's already into these kind of cliche ideas of existence through the kind of American lens. But yeah, this like, lightning, fire and suddenly he's living. I was like, well, that's convenient. I was like, wow,
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah, I mean, there's some good comments about this stuff in the chat. Lightning solved all problems in the 80s, like Back to the Future. I had to unlearn all this in my engineering and physics courses growing up. And this is the thing is like, um, and I think one of the big places that you would see this is like comic books, right? And we still deal with this a lot within sort of Marvel, right? Or also like, things like, I mean, the X-Men are part of Marvel, but maybe that's a good example, right? It's like these weird events that produce, like Spider-Man gets his powers because he gets bit by a radioactive spider, right? Hulk gets his powers because he gets, gamma radiation, right? And so this idea that it's all junk science, right? And it's an interesting thing within science fiction, and I'd be interested to talk to like really techie folks about this. Dwayne would be good to talk about it. Is that there is some science fiction that's actually written by scientists, right? So I think like I want to say Isaac Asimov is an example of this. Um, but like I'm sure there are others. So there's science fiction that's written by people who actually understand science, and it doesn't mean that it's not also fictionalized and all of this kind of stuff. But then there's also science fiction that's kind of comic book science, right? It actually doesn't even make any kind of sense. And so, wow, Terry got struck by lightning in the late 80s. Umbrella took a hit, but my thumb on my metal shaft and it hurt like hell. Wow, that's wild. Glad that you survived that wild encounter with lightning. So yeah, I mean, just this notion that they get into this, particularly with Stephanie's character and how she relates to number 5, right? This idea too of what you were saying kind of about creation, right? Eventually there's a comment of Crosby's character saying, it's a machine, right? Like, because he's always playing that role within the film of it can't do these things. Like, actually playing that, at least the argument that would be presented by a technologist to say, look, this thing is programmed. It runs programs. It does things that we tell it, where we've laid out what it can do. And she's like, no, it's alive. And she basically says, I'm a machine, you're a machine, but we're alive, and so is number 5, right? Like, this is the kind of, and so again, like it does, it's like it's basically an act of God, right? And I mean, it's interesting, like, I don't know if they still do this as much, but airlines for certain instances will say like, well, why did you miss your flight, or why was your flight canceled, right? And if it's an act of God, like there's like certain outs of like they don't have to, reimburse you or whatever it is, right? So this is this kind of idea that's even within law sometimes of,
Isn't that in like insurance things, the act of God?
yeah,
Maybe they don't use that phrase anymore, but like, yeah,
I
it's
think
like
they
it's in
do.
some, yeah, act of God. So like weathers, disasters, so forth and so on.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and someone said insurance too. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So
yeah.
yeah, it's go ahead. You're gonna say
Anyway,
something?
no, I mean that's basically it
Yeah.
for now.
Yeah, so I guess the next sequence is so they're looking for him, and you immediately cut to Stephanie, who is Ali Sheedy's character. And she has a home that she lives in, lots of animals, and which I think is an interesting thing to kind of bring in, right? And the first time you see her, she has a truck that she's sort of driving home. Um, and the truck is like she's like she is like a foodie, right? It's like a food truck, Stephanie's Snacks or something like that, right? So you it's another like kind of trope of young woman or young man. It can sometimes I think be both genders who or the one of the two genders that they'll explore in these movies, let's say for a much better phrase, that um is kind of like lost in life, you know, they're kind of struggling through, but they're good people, right? So one of the immediate things is she has this boyfriend, or ex-boyfriend, who's like at her place trying to basically steal her dog to take him to, I think, to the military, or is it a military kennel, right? I think something like that. It's to a kennel, but I can't, it might have been I can't remember, right? But trying to basically steal her dog to get some money. He says that she owes him money, but she's like, "No, you were living off of me all this time." And he's definitely painted to be very, very like a total asshole. He has like a trucker hat and all that type of stuff. Doesn't seem like anyone who would actually be her boyfriend. Is like when I was watching, I was like, she wouldn't really date a guy like this, but like, okay, whatever. Okay, you got to create shit like it's kind of like okay, Oh, so you want to do the girl who always dates the bad guys kind of trope. It's like it just becomes so tropish, right? And she has this like argument with her. You can see she's very tough, right? And very like morally bound. They really want to set that up with you. And she has like all these animals around, right? And that they're kind of setting up that eventually she'll be the kind of one that'll be the point for Johnny, because then Johnny he gets stuck to the front of her car, isn't that right? He gets to the front of her car as he's like basically. So Johnny has these like series, or number five has these series of kinds of like, bumbling outs of, getting out of the compound. A lot of it is just like this comedy stuff. It's a little, and a lot of like you start to see like the early part of his quips and all that type of stuff. And he gets there. She doesn't notice him, that he's on her truck, so forth and so on. But then eventually they have the convergence where he's like basically like in her truck, like, making it happen. She thinks it's the ex, right? She goes into the place and then she sees him. And then the thing that's funny is that she thinks he's an alien, right? And not a robot, right? She thinks he's an alien and like she's been visited. And I think she even says, like, oh wow, of course it's me, right? She's like, yeah, like of course they'd come and find me, right? I'm the person the aliens would come and talk to, which I think is another interesting thing to kind of invoke extraterrestrials, because the 80s, and then I think the 90s even more with the X-Files, is very, very extraterrestrial obsessed. I actually think, yeah, I think in the 90s, once we get past kind of certain Cold War things, with the upping the ante of global conspiracy, then extraterrestrials becomes everything. But I think the 80s, with things like Cocoon, Aliens, Close Encounters,
E.T.
um, ET, thank you. That's probably one of the other ones. I think Batteries Not Included was still in the 80s. Was that the
Yeah.
90s? Things like that.
No, it's 80s.
80s. I think those things, start setting up the consciousness. So I think bringing in that consciousness of extraterrestrials in a film where you want to prove sentience of a robot, I think is important, because she immediately recognizes him as lifelike. Like she doesn't her first glance at him is not to be like, "Oh, you're a robot doing something weird," or "No, you're actually a living thing," right? Um so yeah, that becomes the kind of like their intro and like their kind of like connection, and really by the end of the movie, with like Steve Guttenberg playing like I feel like a third role, the movie really becomes in many ways like a physical and kind of emotional two hander between the two of them, right? Um, Gutenberg is like the kind of like third kind of character, kind of like managing the both of them, pretty much giving them the opportunity to like release, and like have like a future life outside of this. But like it really becomes between Ali Sheedy and the robot.
I
And
mean,
it's amazing.
actually, one of the things that's interesting about this film, and again, like I don't mind going kind of jumping around at this point because the plot is like not that interesting, but is that you do have this, nowadays with so-called AI, with these chatbots and the proliferation of them, you do have human beings develop basically mental health issues, dependencies on these things, right? And actually this idea of people like falling in love, right, with their AI chatbot, right? Like, I mean, this it's absurd to talk about, but like you watch bourgeois media enough, like these are stories that are circulating on the news and stuff like that, right? Um, and I mean, yeah, like people, we all, we should say just at a base level, I think most of us probably know we have at least a somewhat unhealthy relationship with technology, with our phones, with the internet these days, right? But I think that it's quite easy to actually just to understand, right, how uh, a program that's designed to basically study you and respond to you in ways that it's able to kind of compute how you're responding and what kinds of responses you're looking for, right? And obviously this is to get to the like really ugly side of it. This is very much produced by real people in the global South. You know, thinking particularly about like those stories about African workers in like Kenya who are doing like these sex chat bots and stuff like that, and have to like study all these like sexual fantasies of all these different people to like try to produce responses and stuff like that. I mean, there's a real dark side to this stuff. It is not just like, you know, some server talking to you or whatever. Um, but this film kind of shows this in a certain way. Like Stephanie actually, you could say, I mean, she develops a very unhealthy relationship with number five. They dance together. Johnny number five makes her breakfasts the next day. Like, there's a lot of romantic sexual undertones to all of this. It's kept at a level where it's kind of, you know, PG enough, I guess, that like you as kids, you're probably not thinking about it too deeply, but you can kind of just see it unfold on the screen. I mean, number five learns how to dance by watching Saturday Night Fever, right? And like, this is the, this is, I guess, to say something that's kind of interesting about how they show number five developing, right? Is obviously, yes, it has consciousness, but there's a little bit of a logic of, and this is, I think, what's really interesting about this film because it set our generation up. It primed us along with other stuff to kind of have certain expectations of what AI, so-called AI is, what it does, what we would want it to do, right? Um, and so the way number five basically develops itself is with input, right? So there is some recognition that it doesn't just know things, you know, it knows some things, but it's limited in terms of what it knows, right? And I'm saying no intentionally because you're supposed to believe that this particular robot has developed consciousness because it was struck by lightning. Um, but it reads the entire encyclopedia, which for those of you who were not around in the 80s, we had these large books full of art from aardvark to, you know, Zed. I don't know. Um,
Definitely a sign of class too to have like encyclopedias and dictionaries
full
in all fully on like your bookshelves. It's very interesting kind of artifact from like the pre-internet times.
Yeah, it was a big deal to have a full set. We did not. My parents were not gonna pay for a
My
full
dad did
set,
it. My dad did
you
it,
know.
and science books. And my dad does not give a fuck about science.
Yeah, but there were door-to-door salesmen basically to try to sell you full sets of, like, Encyclopedia Britannica or whatever. Um, some of us, you know, just went to the library, right? But, like but anyway, she has all that, and it reads every book in her house, and it's like starting to then rip apart her house, like take apart food and all this kind of stuff. It's like wanting to feel and crush it, you know. And so she finally figures out, oh, I'll just put it in front of the TV, which is a kind of fascinating moment, right? Because this is like, I was like, okay, it's the parent who no longer has the tools to be able to like, you know, properly parent their child, who's like, here, just sit here and watch this thing. Very 80s. And so that's between reading her book collection and watching television. Number 5 essentially learns everything that it needs to know.
So on this point of well, one is the input, and I'll come to that in a second, but the other one is about like the desire and the kind of connection. So one of the fascinating things I also found was that he was immediately made male upon being struck by lightning. So that he wasn't like made like a genderless robot, right? Because one of the things you see is he follows this other robot that's like kind of woman coded early, and there's like a little bit of a tail, and it's kind of like you show that he has like his eyes go a little like this, right? They have a little, so there's a thing that he has a kind of like male carnal desire, which then gets into his relationship with Stephanie, because there's also a thing that he does like Stephanie, right? And then he recognizes that she's a woman. There's like a scene where he like sees her when she's taking a bath, and he's like is shy. It's like about it. He like almost like has like their version of a blush with like his eyes like hanging, right? So there could be a suggestion because he was developed by male scientists, so he'll have a kind of like male coding, but I don't think that's really it. I, I I just find it interesting that's like where their imagination would go with the sentient being, but then he wants input too, which is like, see, this is like where it gets into like gender shit. It's like really weird. He wants to like constantly like take things, right? And this was like an interesting concept because it becomes like an overarching, I think, function of Johnny Five, the idea of input, right? And that he needs information, right? And he needs to know, and that is his function of existence is knowing things, right? The more that he knows, the more that he's exposed to like knowing things, the more life like he can be, which is for American kind of like thought and like philosophy, very aligned. The idea that ideas are everything, that if we can develop, envelop, take in, and then be able to kind of express ourselves through ideas, that's the proof of existence, right? And there's a lot of, commentary around that, especially if you think about from Marxist materialists, on the kind of dangers of those that kind of being your base philosophy on how you kind of function, that everything is about ideas and ideas are the things. But we'll get to that in this. There's like a key point when him and Crosby have their big moment where he proves to Crosby that he's alive. I think that really kind of gets into the moments. But the other thing that's interesting is the input that he gets. It's all pop culture shit. After he goes through all of the the uh the
Encyclopedias
encyclopedias,
and
he
books,
wants
yeah.
more, right? So he starts wrecking pretty much, Stephanie's house, like looking at her, breaking up her china. So she needs like a solution. So she gives him a TV, right? And he basically watches the Three Stooges, a bunch of commercials, and it all becomes like his input. And the TV being this like, never ending input machine. And she makes like a comment of like, oh well, you didn't come here, because she still thinks he's an alien at this point. Um, to like basically become a couch potato or something like that. She said, I think she might actually say couch potato, but something like referencing like an overwatcher of TV. But throughout the film, how Five proves his existence is through a kind of male coded like desire, be a morality that will talk about how he gets to that morality in a way, and then also his expression of like pop culture things that he gets through input, right? Because as the movie goes, he's able to like reference a TV show, he's able to copy a voice of something like that. He becomes like this like idealized expression of like Americanness. Because the other thing about with him, and this goes to like the second thing I was talking about his like moral compass, is that there's never a moment they want you to doubt that he is of a high moral, or actually, you know what, let's even leave, he's of a high moral it's where like it gets chaotic because like they're thinking like the base morality of a living thing is nonviolent and I guess egalitarian and giving, but then he has these like desires that are a little funky, right? And uh all his input comes from American culture, which we know is fucked up. So it's like, you trying to tell me if he watched TV for 24 hours, he wouldn't come out there with some really bad ideology? Okay, cool. But this is also like how like pop culture thinks of itself. It thinks of itself in America, especially in the 80s, as like this like high point of like, you know, just good natured expression, even though, you know, we were all really, we're just good people, man. America, we're just having fun. Over there in those other countries, they're not having fun. We're just having fun here. Calm down. Don't be so serious.
Yeah, it would be very interesting to talk to somebody about this movie that lived in a socialist country at the time, or like, you know, Eastern Europe, or, you know, where somewhere else, right? Because I think one of the things that I've always heard about like sort of the end of the Soviet Union is just that, you know, obviously there's the development of the black market, right, which got talked about a lot within the Western media or whatever, but that American products like start to really make their way in, right? And people are like, "Oh, you're keeping short circuit from us. Like we can't have this great, you know, this great American culture, this freedom, right?" But this is like the projection, right? Of, and it still is, unfortunately, in a lot of ways, but it was very intense in the 80s and in the 90s of creating this idea of, you know, I don't know, it is still there. It's all it's the individualism, the bourgeois shit, all these commodities, you know, these things. And I mean, it's, you could see it today. It is also true in the 80s. It's a good comment you had about her sort of weird class position where somehow she's a food truck worker and has a million things, but then she's also got a house like stocked with books and fresh fruits and everything. Like it's like kind of weird, right? Because it's, on one level, she seems like she should be a very working class, if not even like sub working class person in some respects. And yet she doesn't seem to have any, you know, real needs at all. But anyway, American culture very often, as people know, it promotes the people that we see on TV live at levels of class and social standing that most of us could never reach in our lives, right? Like they have huge houses, big apartments in New York or LA or whatever else, right? And you know, it's just, it's a fantasy, right? That's being kind of promoted to us. So that fantasy obviously is promoted very much to the rest of the world, right? If you just come to America, right? Or if you just ascend to our capitalist ideology, then you too can have a robot who's struck by lightning who will dance to Saturday Night Fever with you. All right. So so yeah, there's the back and forth. Steven brought up something I hadn't. So she does give him the Turing test, which is an interesting thing, and so does, I think, um, Crosby kind of does that later, right? Which, so there's like an imitation gain, evaluation, sets of criteria, right? Is a computer able to sort of act and behave in human ways? And open AI, chat GPT was like one of the first sort of large language models to sort of pass this test, right? um so that's kind of interesting in some respect. That's something I'd want to delve into more. I haven't even really, you know, studied that at all. There's this point there where he kills a grasshopper. So he mimics things. He goes out, he kills a grasshopper. He's jumping like a grasshopper, which is ridiculous. I mean, this is what you were talking about. I didn't even really spend time thinking about this too much, but of course in the 80s, like they wouldn't have had anything that could actually do the stuff robotically that Johnny Five does in the film. So they have to have people like probably on pulleys and all kinds of shit, like moving this thing around and doing all sorts of stuff.
It was totally, I mean, they did a good job of bringing it out, but it was totally something pulled from above. But I can only imagine because of the weight of that thing, the amount of stuff that they had to do with it. It probably was really annoying. I only hope the crew was treated well because it sounded like a shoot that was absolutely boring and stupid. And potentially really like difficult and grueling.
Maybe this is why Steve Gutenberg didn't want to do the sequel. So he kills he as he's doing these ridiculous big jumps as this massive robot, he actually stamps out the grasshopper, right? And he's telling Stephanie to reassemble it, right? Because he only understands that term from being in the factory and the robots and all this kind of stuff. And she's like, no, it's dead, right? Like, and so this is where she explains to him dead is forever, right? And so he now knows that if he's captured by Nova, that they will kill him, right? That they will disassemble him, and this will mean that he won't be alive anymore. And this is like a big existential moment for for the robot philosophically and in terms of its worldview and everything else, right? And so this is kind of the moment I think that produces what comes up later, which is that I mean, there's probably something else in the film that I missed or whatever, but he develops, a morality of nonviolence, which again, I agree with you totally. How would he have developed that by watching, John Wayne movies or Three Stooges, right?
I mean, he quotes John Wayne. John Wayne, like dog. What his input would have been: indigenous people should be murdered. Black people are terrible, and communists should be given show trials. That would have been the Johnny Five mentality if he's getting the input of John Wayne. It's so absurd.
But and maybe he was watching some children's programming or something. I mean, of course, a lot of our children's program was incredibly violent in the 80s. But it is actually interesting to think about, right? Because this movie, the purpose obviously is for the audience, right? It's for kids to be indoctrinated with this very puerile discussion of violence and nonviolence that we all attained at some point growing up, which I think now is most represented as in terms of how Martin Luther King Day is celebrated by the ruling class of this country, as this, like, he just wanted peace, and he just wanted, the worst versions of Martin Luther King Day come because the NBA does a full slate of programming that day, National Basketball Association. People know that. I don't know why I said that. Does a full slate of programming that day, and you get all of these players repeating these lines that they've clearly been given about, like, oh yeah, I'm just so grateful that he cared about peace so that we could all be here and be so successful and continue his legacy. And, it's just like the most absurd thing, right? But this is kind of what it's reduced to. And here you just get the kind of what I think is, from my point of view, is one of the unfortunate sort of byproducts, even when you do dig into Martin Luther King's like writings and philosophical, is that he does actually raise, which probably comes from Gandhi. He does actually raise nonviolence to this kind of moral philosophy, right? So there's a distinction, and that's not to discount what he did or the movements he was a part of and how they used nonviolence as a tactic. But I do think that, like the Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, interaction, and Kwame always would salute the John Lewis's, the Martin Luther Kings, like even in Kwame's autobiography, where the co-author is presenting to him like, here's all the bad shit that John Lewis is saying about you. He's like, I won't, he's like, because that dude was on the front lines, and he would take his licks, right? And he believed in what he did, and he struggled, right? And so I think Kwame always had this belief that the people who put their bodies on the line, they deserve some degree of respect. But he did have his moments, obviously, where he talked about his disagreements with the kind of moral philosophy, and that it just doesn't work, right? Because the point is that your enemy has to have a conscience, right? And so that's none of that is included in the film. It's just that you get non-violent, like number 5 as a higher order being than the other robots and the military within the film, because he decides that he won't kill folks. He still uses his laser, but he uses it to like disarm other combatants essentially, and this is presented as him being so evolved, right? And I think it's also, of course, related to this idea of proof of his humanity as well, which is an interesting element.
Yeah, I can't remember. I think it's in the second one where they actually remove his laser, and I think they give him like a toolbox or something like that. It's like he has like a it's like a sign of his demands. Um,
But isn't that also because they want him to build them robots?
well, that's the whole other thing with two. It becomes this um small business under capitalism and individual genius, or small genius company kind of like, celebration of that movie, right? And like it's really big corporate. It's like this. It is the obsession that the issue are these big corporate entities um that have people up top or in leadership who have just no moral compass. So it's not the idea that these types of situations breed or need those types of people up top. It's the fact that for some reason they've gotten up top. And if you just have, I don't know, working girl running the corporation, or Michael J. Fox in The Secret of My Success running the corporation, everything will be okay, right? We'd have a much better corporate sector. Right. So these movies kind of like, I think, aid each other in this kind of like project of how we think about, big corporations. So to like the morality question, something that I also found interesting with like the violence is, there's a lot of discussion, I think, that happens amongst, moralist liberals, where when they'll say something, look at something like Gaza, right? And this is when they want to have a kind of humanitarian call and acknowledge the Zionist states. And I'm gonna say acknowledge, I'm gonna put those in quotations, Zionist states, murder of Palestinian people. But they want to kind of frame it under a kind of we need less violence in the world kind of framework, right? Because this will then they want to be very careful with not sounding like they're pro Hamas or pro armed resistance, so forth and so on. And we can do the same thing with Iran right now and all this type of stuff. So when you take violence out of history and you make it into this like abstract moral code that comes down from the lightning bolts, which is also funny because lightning can be violent, right? And think about even like the kind of idea of where we get lightning from like Greek. It's like Greek, right? It's like the like the throwing the lightning down, all that type of stuff, right? The bolts of lightning, or Moses, right? Um, the But when you take it out of a kind of like historical center, whenever someone has to, use violence, if we're talking about like, Fanon, right? You're gonna get the Hannah Arendt response that this is a degenerate life form and there needs to be some kind of just higher moral thing that they can never really explain to you what that higher moral thing will ever be. They can never really give you the substantive argument of how we're going to get out of this quagmire, other than like words like just love or I don't know, humanity, or and it becomes all very shaky, right? And movies like this, I think, aid that. And I think that became really big in the 80s because there was like probably a section of like liberal thought when we're in the Cold War who were definitely against nuclear war. They didn't want nuclear war, nuclear holocaust. They didn't want a kind of World War III scenario. But they also did not want the end of the American empire as well. They were really into their spandex and their MTV and their VHS recorders, right? And being able to on Friday night go see Short Circuit, that they wanted to maintain the society. So kind of like living in a kind of fantasia of like if the world just got better was like self-serving for their own ideological interest. And self-serving for the fact that they would never have to do anything above except being a fucking like higher moralist. They would never have to actually do anything, right, materially to like, help rid the world of the violence, and also really ignore the violence that's happening against people by the project that maintains their life, right? So like these movies just become this entry where, because then Johnny eventually says that like Crosby asks him like, where did you discover that he's like this idea that it's not good to kill people? He said, from myself. And I found that really interesting, that like they wouldn't even like historicize it, that like it was like his base kind of like human understanding, that he understood it, right? That you shouldn't do that. And because he's like more childlike or more less corrupted by like the social world, he has like the right idea. So if we're all more like Johnny number 5, we'd all just have a better world. And that's just bullshit. And it's a bad thing that we still do, but it's really a bad thing that we teach kids, because kids being the ones who watch this movie, it's and I'll say one last thing. It's the thing that like I don't like about when people say, well, we need to be more childlike, right? That kind of thing, right? And
Mhm.
like, oh, we need to be more childlike, and think about like the kind of innocence of a child. I got into an argument with someone about that, and like, having a 2-year-old will kind of make you relook at those things, right? Because when my daughter is frustrated, she hits me in the face.
100%. My first one was very, nonviolent in a lot of ways. My second one, whew,
Yeah, my daughter has look, the other day she's like, bah! And I know what it is, and I don't get angry, and I tell her gentle hands, and we do that whole process. But that's something, this idea that like kids don't have these responses that like enter into that. It's also a misunderstanding of that, right? And yeah, anyway, that's long way of saying a lot of things.
yeah, a couple of things just before we move on. I mean, one, the nuclear component is important, and it's something that we didn't talk about, because one of the things that gets said about the robots, right, in that initial, sales pitch to the Pentagon, and one of the quiet conversations is like, look, these things are all armed with a nuke. We can like drop one into Moscow, and it can go around, and it can blow it all up from the inside, right? So this is an important element of this film, is that part of the way that these are sort of quietly being promoted to the Pentagon is like, this is how you win the Cold War in a nuclear fashion, right? Is with these robots, right? So it's an important thing to underscore, because not only do they have lasers that can blow everything else up, but also there is a discussion of nuclear warfare within this film. And I do think, in that vein, it is interesting to think about the film a little bit, because I do think that maybe it'll be interesting when we do War Games, who's also by the same director, right? Um, because there was concern for sure in the 80s about nuclear, mutually assured destruction, annihilation, all of these things, and a nuclear holocaust, right? And this produced, even within liberals, discourses around peace and how do we like get beyond this. And you got an emphasis around nuclear disarmament, which we no longer have. Like the United States has totally like backed out of this, but there were actual treaties. This was part of the process of the end of the Cold War and sort of the meetings that happened between the Soviet Union. I think we should look at this, but I think maybe they had already started to have some of this discussion in the late 80s, maybe not by
It's
86, but
80,
around that
I
time.
think it's 80. I think it's 88, but I could be
It might be. Yeah.
misremembering. Yeah.
But it's already in the it's like it's being discussed, right? The United States and the Soviet Union, while it's still a tense relationship, are at this point in time like, having some of these kinds of discussions and so on. And a lot of that has to do with Gorbachev too, right? There's all those components. Yeah, and I think that that's kind of important, and it does very much when you get to the 90s, obviously with the end of the Cold War, with the Soviet Union dissolving, right? And the whole kind of opening up, the so-called end of history, you get this whole series of peace talks and peace summits and all of these things, which is, of course, the product of resistance and anti-colonial forces like really not having a major backer also that they can go to anymore. And this is where you get Oslo, it's where you get the end of apartheid and the agreements there. It's where you get all of these different, Northern Ireland, the Good Friday agreements. All of these things start to happen. And I mean, at the time, I guess one of the things I would say is that ideologically, this sort of liberal idea had a lot of purchase, obviously for the United States, but also globally. And this belief of, oh, well, we can transition out of this kind of Cold War into this world that is kind of governed by, world peace and kind of mutual security, prosperity kind of ideas, right? And, this all becomes bullshit because US imperialism wants to be violently hegemonic, right? Basically. And, if you follow like the work of Ali Qadri, for instance, his argument very much sort of, I think, would buttress a reading that says that functionally the system requires this violence in order to maintain the sort of profit rates for the first world. And so it's actually like a structural problem for monopoly capitalism and for the most wealthy, people and sectors, that the violence is productive for them. And so they it's not to say they can't get away from it, but it is to say that they would have quite a bit to lose in terms of their own ability to continue to make, endless profits if they did, right? And so there is a big profit motive towards those sectors. Anyway.
Yeah. I'm trying to think where to go next. I mean, the movie, because the movie is like this weird road film after a
Yes.
while, and you're just getting this kind of like back and forth of like them being connected and reconnected. I think one of the things to bring in is also is the nerd, the caged nerd thing in the film. So one of the kind of functions, the plot functions in the film, is to send Ben and
They're incels, basically. They're incels.
to send the two scientists to basically go out and like grab number 5, right? So they get their own truck that has like spare parts, and it becomes like, relevant to like the plot towards the end of the film. And one of the things that what's Fisher Stevens' character? Is it Ben? Is that what his name is? Fisher Stevens' character? What's his name?
Yeah, Ben. Yeah.
Ben. He says, there's like people outside. There's even girls.
There's girls.
There's girls. So there's like this like And I think Revenge of the Nerds is before this, maybe, right? I think the first one is before this movie. Um, there's
I think so.
definitely this grabbing of the kind of cage nerd needs woman kind of attitude that
It was before
also
this.
enables like crass jokes, right? Like
And
eventually Ben makes a joke about, getting a hard on, thinking about Stephanie like to Crosby, right? And there becomes this kind of like triangle thing between not between with Ben Crosby and number 5 around Stephanie. Um that like Stephanie I don't even I don't know if she even has an awareness of it as much as like they just kind of make it a thing that's just like it feels like a natural kind of happening. They want you to see that this is like natural kind of way that men and women interact. And it's innocent. I think that's the big thing they want you to think about, that these kinds of ways of being are very innocent and they can't lead to anything that would be any slightly weird, dangerous, threatening, coercive. None of that stuff would happen in this scenario. It would all be very innocent, lighthearted. And then eventually, Stephanie, number 5, and Crosby will all go live with each other at the end of the movie. Because the other big thing is they make that once Crosby sees Stephanie, he falls for her and he's like really into her and he's like he gets googie eyes, right? So he wants to find number 5, but he also really wants to make this like connection. So like when him and Ben see each other, they start making these like talks about, and did you kiss her, did you have these like moments with her and all that. And it's all very creepy, and it also shows you how much of these movies exist within the male imagination, especially the science movies. And when women are introduced, because I think she's the only woman character. I mean, substantive character. You have small characters in the movie, but I think that becomes functional. You eliminate all other women, you make one, so you make like women scarce, like a scarce commodity that has to be taken. And of course, this is Steve Gutenberg, who like, and I would need someone to really talk to me about it who understood it in the period, is kind of a heartthrob, right? He had like
a
a
little bit, I think.
heartthrob thing. It's a little bit of a heartthrob, and I think part of his heartthrobiness is that he had like a kind of everyman. He's a guy from Brooklyn, from like Flushing. Brooklyn, and he moved to Flushing, and like he has a bit of an everyday kind of thing. Like I said, I can't stand his acting because the dude literally is smiling, you know, every time he speaks a line, right? So I think there's a part where it's supposed to be disarming. So the fact that like he's not even really like focused in his acting kind of like takes the like what could be the threat of this man like actually like going for this woman who's like has a whole other thing in her mind. Her whole other thing is like saving this robot. She ain't trying to get with you, you know? Yeah. Steve Gutenberg. That halo, that thing at the back is hilarious. Oh man. But yeah, like, and yeah, I mean, so it's like the kind of nerd incel thing that was really popular in the 80s. It doesn't go as wicked as Revenge of the Nerds. I mean, that movie
Weird
is
Science is another one too, which was
Weird
also before
Science
this.
too. Weird Science and Revenge of the Nerds go to really. I mean, Revenge of the Nerds literally has sexual assault in the movie, so like
Yeah.
it literally does. So, but yeah, it's a funny thing, and like they do it heavily in the movie, and it's supposed to be part of like the driving thing, and it gets resolved very happily for him at the end. He loses his job, but he gains a sentient robot and a woman, and they're gonna go live happily ever after on a farm on a farm in Montana that he just seems to have because his uncle left it to him.
Yeah. I mean, he probably makes a lot of money as like a Pentagon contractor and the primary technologist behind these robots that can hold nuclear weapons and shoot lasers. But the yeah, I don't know. I mean, my mind went to different places. I imagine that Ali Sheedy's life in the 80s was probably not that great, playing these roles and the kind of fame that came from Brat Pack and, all this kind of stuff is probably pretty rough. Um, but also I'm reminded of Samantha Youssef and a lot of kind of her discussion, with us and others just about how gross these like production rooms and just the industry of Hollywood is even today, right? And I think when you look back at these 80s movies, there's much more of the kind of, I don't even say like unconscious or like it's just conscious weirdness, right? Like just coming very much, it's like it's right there. I mean, this is a movie for kids, and you have this weird like sexual tension that is a real theme in the film. You have these nerds who are like, especially Ben's character, who is definitely supposed to be the horny one, right? Like just going around and
And of
we
course,
got to
like
find girls.
I'm also gonna say making the South Asian the caged horny one also is just the
Totally.
other like racist thing, and the fact that he also doesn't get he can only live through white Steve Gutenberg too. His sexual
Yeah.
fantasies can only be completed by he can't actually complete them. Steve Gutenberg has to. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, totally. And a a gross way to, I mean, they set it up where, because he's like so horny, like he's the one who's like seeking this out and making all these bad jokes. I mean, we're not even going to go into like the kind of jokes, but it's just like it's just really bad, really racist. Like you watch it, and especially if you watch it with the knowledge that this is a brown-faced white actor and you're looking at it, you're like, "Holy cow," right? Like that actually, I don't know. That's a whole different, but it's just it's nuts. So then, but Gutenberg's character is like presented as the nerd who's also an incel, but like hasn't ever really thought about it, basically, right? Like he loves science so much that I didn't really ever think about, it's kind of like girls, like, right? He has that kind of, like, what do you mean? Like, oh, never thought about that before. I'm 29, I mean, it's just, it's kind of absurd. So then when he kind of falls for Ali Sheedy's character, right? It gets to be this more, he doesn't have to appear like the creepy, horny dude totally, right? He gets to appear like, "Oh, like I never thought about any of this before, but I fell in love," like kind of thing. And now I'm interested in trying to get the girl. So it kind of takes that trajectory. And all of this is a little bit, I mean, it's very strange, but then you add to it the fact that Ali Sheedy's really in love with Johnny Five. I mean, that's and so it's kind of like her attraction to Crosby is sort of almost like a displacement, or Johnny Five's creator, right? Or like, because she can't consummate a relationship with a robot. It's yeah. Anyway, that whole part of it is very strange.
Yeah, one thing to add, and we brought up Samantha. It made me remember this point that I wanted to make was you also have to think about people like Steve Gutenberg's character and even Ben's character, being stand-ins for actual filmmakers and screenwriters because they see themselves as on two levels. A, they do see themselves as kind of like nerds. A lot of them were unpopular people who eventually became people with lots of power. So I'm sure their little funky dealings that they would do to women that they were encountering in Hollywood, they wanted to kind of like paint in much cleaner ways, right? When they would do certain types of movies, or when they do some of these movies, justify their kind of shitty behavior because it's some kind of like male competition thing, and they're the real champion. So I'm invoking things like Revenge of the Nerds or Weird Science. So even though these are scientists, I think they're often stand-ins for filmmakers and screenwriters, right? They see that as a kind of like good stand-in. The second thing about the stand-in thing is I also think it exists in their relationship to Hollywood executives. I think often that these kind of like big characters who like run companies is also their kind of displaced feelings of how they think about executives. And they want to kind of paint a kind of way, well, like we just kind of go along with it. But I know, there's a better world out there, but it's really all their fault. Right. And if these executives just wouldn't be so, executive-y, we could, be doing better things. And you hear these filmmakers like who are in Hollywood constantly, talk about the mystical executive, and like they when they have their complaints. Like someone like Christopher Nolan will do that a lot. Like, but I'm sorry, like look, I no Christopher Nolan, like dude, I I don't think based on the movies you make that you would be having ideologically anything different if if you were the executive. You're just mad that like they didn't give you the extra 5 million, that you wanted, and whatever little thing. It's not about that. So when they make these movies, it's often them pissing on executives because they think they're smarter than them. They have more money than them sometimes, have more ability. They have to go to them to basically get the green light, um, and they resent it. So sometimes these like things are like a painting of their resentment. It comes out of that, you know. And then a third way is I sometimes wonder, like if you see like Mulholland Drive, there is this sequence where the gangsters are picking the lead actress, right? And someone asked David Lynch about it, and he says it's true. So sometimes I wonder when they focus on military too, I wonder if this is also an expression of like the things they've had to probably do with military and how they kind of want to displace that feeling too and act like, hey man, I didn't really do anything. I just, made the movie, right? Like they don't want to act like they weren't real functioning, subjects within that process.
Yeah, those are good insights. One scene in particular that was kind of just weird is like, so we should say obviously Johnny Five learns how to drive at some point. Like he figures out they're going to disassemble himself, locks himself in Stephanie's truck, reads the manual to the truck, which I also think is hilarious because reading a manual to a vehicle definitely does not tell you anything that you need to know about how to drive, which of course he really can't. So, but he's like swerving all over the road or whatever. But anyways, Johnny Five learns how to drive. So there's that. Um, but like a little bit later, there's this scene where he comes in. Stephanie's in the bathtub, right? And he comes in to the bathroom and he's like, "You changed color. Nice software." Right? Looking at her boobs, obviously, right? And it's just like, again, I mean, just the people who make these movies are disturbed. Let's just put it that way, right? So yeah. Going on other stuff, yeah, you have the Saturday Night Fever scene, dances with Stephanie to More Than a Woman.
Which is
um,
so weird. Like of all the, first of all, like to re-reference your own scene is just lame. I'm sorry. Like this is corny, bro. Like this is some it's just cornball stuff. First off, and then yeah, like to More Than a Woman. If you've seen Saturday Night Fever, that's like the real emotion. Well, there's two things about, if you remember from Saturday Night Fever, about that scene, is that it's the like most emotional connection scene, but she also rejects him at the end. That woman says to Travolta's character, "I can't be with you," right? So you're kind of led to believe. So they're also kind of making Stephanie the unattainable for Johnny Five. And one thing I did read is that apparently there were the kind of love connection was built up more in the earlier cuts, but the audience's responses were really bothered by it. So I'm actually curious if they
Shocking.
shocking, right? I'm actually curious if they kind of completed a thing of where she says to Johnny that like you're a robot, I'm a woman or something like that. You know, because like it is kind of more made to think that like her and Steve Gutenberg will like kind of, get together. Um though they don't really ever kind of like fasten it, but like script wise it's totally awkward because it doesn't really make any sense. They kind of never like finish that kind of like thing. So it probably is somewhere on like the cutting room floor.
Hopefully never to be revealed to the world.
I'm good.
So at this point, Frank comes back in. So Frank is her violent, abusive boyfriend, ex-boyfriend, right? And this is also, I mean, we should just say quickly, it's not worth delving into too much, but he's supposed to set up the dichotomy, right? Of he is the bad, abusive, potentially, violent, like all this kind of stuff. Well, not potentially violent, ex. And Gutenberg is the nice nerd, right? So you get that kind of separation between the two of them, but also with Johnny Five. So he comes in and he's come to collect Johnny Five because he wants the reward, right? He wants there's a $25,000 reward, and he's like, I'll split it with you, Stephanie. I take 20, you get 5. And we'll turn in number 5. And so he comes in, he basically like sees the robot eventually and takes her hostage and tries to like negotiate with the robot. She's like, "Oh, you have to explain to it everything that you're doing." So she sort of tricks Frank into telling number 5 what he's gonna do, right? "I'm gonna take you home," right? And then once he realizes it's Nova, then Johnny Five springs into action. I think, what does he do? He shoots it with does he shoot the I can't remember, like, he gets the lasers involved somehow. He does go number
Yeah.
5 gets out of the house, and then he number 5 disassembles Frank's whole car, right? So he takes the whole thing apart. Um, and then
And
I
then Frank
think
like shoots at him. He shoots the gun at him, which like lets number 5 like deflect he deflects everything.
that's right, he deflects it with a
Yeah.
part of the car or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then what's his name? The guy. Why am I blanking now? I just said it a minute ago. Frank. So
Frank.
he
Yeah.
grabs like this metal pipe basically and starts to beat number 5 with it. Stephanie kind of wrestles with him, and then number 5 uses the laser to like take off chunks of the pipe,
Mhm.
chunk after chunk after chunk. So yeah, I don't know whatever what happens with this. It doesn't really matter.
No.
Number 5. Oh, this is one of the things. Number 5 uses the laser to actually undress Frank. So this is kind of he shoots his belt, he shoots his hat, he shoots the heels of his boots, right? And so it's like kind of this humiliation thing. And again, I mean, this is also what's kind of funny about the invocation of nonviolence to some degree, right? Is that Johnny Five is using violence throughout all of this nonviolence. It's just that he's not killing people, right? Like he's using it to disarm enemies, right? Which in like whatever, like anyway. But I just think that's kind of funny because like sometimes the use of nonviolence today, when we talk about how it gets deployed today, it even encompasses things like, you shouldn't spray paint a building or break a window, right? Like it gets to that kind of degree, right? Of a protection of property. And I guess we could just say that at least Johnny Five is willing to, you know, commit violence against property in this film. All right.
Yeah, I mean, I think so as the
So
movie kinda like go ahead.
just quickly, yeah. So then you get Gutenberg's character kind of meeting with Stephanie, and they have the discussion. Is that where you're
Yeah.
gonna go? Or
Yeah, that's
yeah,
where I
go
was
ahead.
gonna go, yeah. Yeah, so, like, he kind of, like Gutenberg is basically gonna meet they create a meeting, um, between them and, like, So, like Gutenberg and or Crosby and Ben, get really excited about him meeting her and all that, and they begin to talk about this is where she really wants to kind of implore to Crosby that Johnny's alive, right? And one of the functions I think that they really try to exploit with Stephanie is that because of a kind of like nurturing nature with animals, so forth and so on, that she'll be able to kind of recognize like life inherently, right? And that's like a big kind of like functions because like you had pointed out, Jay, you know, Crosby uses these real concepts that we would, fundamentally be true about why these things can never be alive, right? Because of, computation, programming, so forth and so on. But there's this constant pushback. No, he's alive. Or she has like, I mean, the lines are like really cliche constantly about like why he's alive. Like it's like, like life doesn't, have justification, something. I forgot what it is. It's very cliche. It's kind of stupid and they don't really explain anything and they like leave it with that. The other big thing is that the security force is tailing Crosby and he doesn't realize it. So it then gets into they make themselves aware, right? There's also a kind of side scene. Is that where the side scene where Johnny is Yeah, he's then also confronted. There's like a parallel scene that's happening where Johnny is confronted by three other robots, and he kind of outwits them and in his kind of way, and it becomes like a big actiony moment, and then he eventually reprograms them into the Three Stooges, which becomes like another kind of like funny thing to kind of prove his like genius ingenuity. But it leads him to basically come back as like a hero to save Stephanie when the security force makes themselves aware. So this is kind of what the movies are happening, is like all this like kind of junky stuff going through to kind of like put them together. But the big thing is to kind of constantly um let us think that Johnny has life and that his life must be defended at all times, which I guess is what, to your point, Jay, it gets into this like weird area that they don't even realize they're doing. They're like they're actually making the argument for why violence is sometimes necessary in a bad way at the same in a bad way, right? So they're actually discounting their argument through the actual narrative of the film, right? Like, but they don't realize that because they're too stupid to honestly like embrace that. Because yeah, for him to be alive, he has to be violent, right? He has to like go back and defend himself and defend these other people, right? So what the
Yeah,
fuck are you talking about? It's just it's the it's the idiocy of liberalism, to be honest with you. That's really what it is.
it is, but it's funny because on some level there is something interesting there. Like he actually doesn't espouse what we would think of today as the kind of moral philosophy of nonviolence and how this gets deployed by liberals in the modern context, really. Um, he has a recognition that at minimum armed self-defense is essential in order to preserve himself and the people he cares about, right? And so it's like, but it does take silly manifestations within the film, like the fact that not only will he not kill any of the military contractors, he also won't like blow up any of the other robots, right? Like he has to preserve the other robots even though they are not sentient like he is, right? And so there's a lot to it that's, it's like, well, how does he make that distinction between the fact that you disassembled, you know, um, Frank's Camaro, right? And like you won't disassemble another robot or something, it's like,
Well,
I don't know.
because it doesn't talk and like move or something like that. It's stupid. I mean,
Yeah.
the other thing it actually eventually gets like even reworked in a more ridiculous way is Terminator 2, where the whole
Mm.
thing about when young John Connor says to Arnold, "You can't kill people." So they make this like incredibly violent movie where he's basically, blowing up tons of shit and no one dies. I mean, I think of the big scene in the factory where they go, like the big like climax moment, and like Arnold's with a freaking Gatling gun, like literally shooting all these cop cars, like just destroying everything. And you see the kind of inner Terminator brain, and it says zero casualties. Get the entire fuck out of here, right? But that's some more AI propaganda, right? AI is so good at violence that it can actually not kill and still be violent.
Yeah.
Which is a Johnny
That
Five thing too, right? Johnny Five has that
no,
precision.
exactly right. I mean, and this is there are it is interesting to watch this film, not because it is good. Obviously, it is like super problematic and racist and anti-woman and all of these things. But the what it promotes in terms of this ideology about so-called AI, you know, is very interesting, right? Because there's obviously this whole 80s fetishization around robots. We do have to do batteries not included. Folks have been mentioning that in the chat, and I haven't seen that in a long time. I remember liking it even more, I think, than this movie as a kid. Um, but yeah, there's all of that. Then yeah, and then we're kind of in the Terminator 2 timeline, all of this stuff, and it is interesting in this movie because this doesn't follow into the second movie. The second movie does become it has weird other themes. It's like small business hustler stuff with like big capital, and it's like Johnny does, you know, small capitalism or whatever. Like Johnny becomes an entrepreneur.
And the violence
Um
more gets enacted on Johnny, which is interesting.
Yeah, yeah, but it's also violence between him and gangs, right? Like that's what that's where the second one goes. Um, but in this one, there is just this open reality, right? That or not reality, but discussion that this is a military contractor project. And I think where it does get quite nefarious is that as kids, we were like, "Oh, this is cute. This is the coolest thing. Like, why wouldn't you want these?" Like, that's why I said it was kind of a miss that they didn't have toys, and I just don't think they had like the technology to produce something that would have really, met the mark, or maybe they just didn't have the budget for it, or whatever else, or they just didn't think about it well enough. But these toys would have killed if they had like some kind of. It wouldn't have even had to do anything, but if there was like a little thing I could put on my you know, just roll it back and forth, and maybe, the pullback racer kind of Johnny Five or whatever. You give it a little light so that it can do a laser, and then you push a button and makes a few sounds. I mean, we had Teddy Ruxpin in the 80s. Like this is not outside of the realm of possibility that they could have done this. So all that is to say, like I'm sure that young people grew up getting into the sciences thinking like, I want to do something like this. I know that we're far enough removed generationally that like the people who are working on like robot dogs and stuff like that probably were not directly inspired by this movie. But that's kind of where this has gone, right? Is that we now are at a space where you can create robots that are closer to this, that actually can move, can be programmed to move, right? And computation and these what are the chips called? Whatever. Like you can get to a place where you can use these large language models and all of this to give some ability of robots to interact in certain scenarios and stuff like that, right? And so, I mean, drones would, of course, be like kind of the biggest, approximation of this. Obviously, they're still guided by humans and all of that. But the point being that this movie was like two kids, and it had a lot of these ideas that are actually true that some people don't even understand now, which is funny in terms of this notion of like, hey, like AI isn't real. right? These are programmed things and they're responding to what they've been programmed to do. But you now have a computing capacity, right, where it gets more approximate to the real. And so I don't know. It's just interesting in terms of the ways that this film kind of on a discursive level promotes something that we're now at, but they kind of could foresee even in that era that like this is where they wanted to go.
Yeah. It's so I guess like the last like bunch of scenes are really, you have the scene where, after this they kind of all kind of come together and they're like in a park at, they have this kind of hideout there. And Crosby, this is where the moment where he discovers for himself through a kind of series of like studies that Johnny is sentient, that he is alive, right? And one of them is is it the Turing test, right? What the butterfly, right? One of them was that, right? And then the other one is a joke, right? He tells them a joke about a rabbi or something, and um it makes Johnny, once he catches the joke, laugh uncontrollably. So this idea that he can go through the same process, emotional processes that humans can, and get things like laughter and so forth and so on. So these become like the proof of life, in human life, which I find also interesting. I thought about this. I was like, well, life isn't just human life. Life is also dogs, plants, right? It's interesting how, and it's very human centric actually in that way, where they want you to think of life only through the idea of humanity, which is also very Western. Actually, I think it's actually very right wing. Also, in kind of adds to the incel energy, or the proto incel energy of this movie. Um, yeah, and like that becomes the kind of like, climax point where Crosby's finally bought in that Johnny's a living thing and that he needs to like defend Johnny, to the end, because like it's like this right to life conversation. Um, yeah, and then the security force tracks them, and then they get cornered, and there's like this big bait and switch at the end where uh Johnny escapes, and he like, to kind of help and save Stephanie and Crosby, and he gets blown up, right? And you're thinking that Johnny's dead, and like Crosby loses his job, and this is where you hear about the thing in Montana, so forth and so on. But then no, Johnny's really alive. It was actually a robot he built, and it was the big bait and switch, right? And oh wow, yeah. And then they're gonna all live as three happy people together in Montana on a ranch. And the ending is so cheesy, right? Because like it like they're like on a road, and then like pulls up to this like big wide shot of the road, and then you see a John Badham film. Like he's like it's like when I see like his name come up, I'm like, oh, this dude really thinks he made something special, right? This is like, a real like, singular moment of like, Hollywood movie making. And it just like kind of comes up, and you get like the montage of like earlier scenes throughout the film over this really syrupy music. Because it's not the Who's Johnny, it's like a different song, isn't it? I think it's a different song. Is at the end of the movie. And yeah, it just it struck me when the movie was finishing, of just of the American mentality in that period of society. Like there was just this idea that we're doing something here that's so significant society wise, right? And like if you like only in this place could this possibility happen for all its problems, right? We have these other things that are like, fundamentally strong enough to make our society function in a good way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's also sort of like, oh, well, maybe the Pentagon robots aren't so bad because they can actually develop, um, consciousness and morals. And so, you know, even though working with these defense contractors might be bad, it'll be okay because you might produce Johnny Five, just needs a lightning strike. Good call from JMP, who's going to be our guests next week. But this was Nintendo had a robot, which I had forgotten this, but it does look like Johnny Five. And maybe when I don't even know what this thing did. A lot of the Nintendo accessories for the NES, like the Power Glove too, like they didn't work for shit, right? But they sold them to us because they looked cool. Couple other. Was there anything else, Mtume, you wanted to say?
The robot was worthless. I had it.
Yeah.
Because my mom bought one of the first Nintendo. She was one of the first Nintendo buyers. She had an interesting thing because my mom worked for ABC at that period, and she was able to kind of get one. It was like a really weird thing. So she got the robot, and the robot did nothing. It was the stupidest thing. And there's something about it that I read many years later that, like, to your point, Nintendo did a lot of like bad planning, that they would do things with certain things and then they ended up not being able to. So it ended up not doing anything and it became obsolete. But I had that shit in my house. I kind of wish I still had it. But yeah, that is a good call because it did look like Johnny Five.
Yeah. There were a lot of accessories and even like false, like they made platforms sometimes that people would then spend money on, and they made games for them for like a couple years. Like I don't know if you remember, they tried to do like a VR version of
Yeah.
Nintendo that was like all like red and black, like like the
Yeah.
the
And
great.
like the big CD-ROM phase, the Sega CD, that was
Yeah,
really shitty. I had that. They had like
I
3
did too.
games. It was such a bad thing. That whole race, that whole tech race was like just a commodity grab.
We're
Ah,
gonna have to do Rocky
what?
Four soon, but yeah, he does have a robot in that one. Yeah, it was
All these
very. I mean,
robot.
it was a big thing, and it's very strange, right? Because I mean, this is like Jetsons mentality too, and stuff like that. But like, they really didn't have the technology for any of this stuff, right? But they're like still going through this process of going to the work of, this is what the future, this is what you're waiting. Someday you're gonna have a robot. It's gonna do everything for you, and you still see now there's more of this type of stuff. I mean, I think things like Alexa and whatnot are built off of this kind of imagination that was implanted as well too.
Oh wow,
Um,
the wizard was just mentioned is 89. So my brain had thought the wizard was actually in the 90s.
yeah,
That's
we
the
should do the
movie with
wizard.
we should do the wizard. I brained
Fred
that to the
Savage, yeah,
90s. Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
I was like waiting for that movie when it came out. I
yeah,
was so
me too.
excited. And I was actually kind of disappointed when I saw it. I was like, I didn't really
Yeah,
like
it
it when I was a
sucks.
kid. It sucked.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very disappointing movie.
I was so not into it.
Yeah. Yeah, anyways, fascinating stuff. All right. So, was there any other movie related stuff that you wanted to say?
No, I think I covered
Me either.
everything. It's not one that, you know. I think for myself, I'm gonna rewatch 2 just to like get it done for the rest of my life and never do it again. But yeah, no, this is a. I think I'm done with this one.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll have to do 2 at some point just because it has some. I mean, do we have to? I don't know.
I
It
don't know.
does have some different themes
We'll
and stuff
watch
like
it
that to
and
like
we
dig
can
into.
we can see the capital theme,
And
but I think that might be solved by other movies like The Secret of My Success and Work. I think Working Girl already kind of hits that really interesting, but maybe there is an element to it. We could look at it.
yeah. I think it's interesting as a like cities are dangerous places full of black and
Hmm.
brown folks who are, like it's a very it's like you can go directly from Short Circuit 2 to Predator 2. Like they're just like
Right.
a
And
straight line.
colors,
Yeah, yeah,
like all these. Oh man.
yeah. All right. So going through the chat, was this movie the inspiration for Wall-E later? I don't know, but there's definitely
I
some
have
similarities there.
heard that. Yes, kind of. There is inspiration. Yeah. Hmm.
Yes, really awful Indian accent and brown face. Yeah, yeah. Um, which makes sense as to why the Indian accent was so bad because it was a white dude. um, yeah. So Steven says if those movies are PNW propaganda, they failed. Never had a pull to the PNW or to the Northwest, but was obsessed with the movie. So yeah,
Yeah.
didn't convince. Although the OR Tourism Board owes us some cash. Yeah, come on, state of Oregon, we're doing. um, yeah, El DeBarge. There you go. It's such a like the lyrics of the song are like there's like a
those
melody that carries
those
it, but it's like
80s theme songs, man, are just like, I think of shit like Mannequin, like those eight with a Jefferson Starship, or no,
yeah.
they were just Starship at that point. I'm sorry. Let me take off the Jefferson.
Yeah, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but yeah, he's absolutely the main character. I mean, he's
Yeah.
there's a couple others, but he's the lead in terms of a
Yeah.
human in that movie, which is
It's
wild.
wild. It's wild that, and like I said, like if you look it up, like there's like early interviews where dude is like, yeah, we tried to make it. We don't think we made it. Oh, one other thing I didn't mention about that actually. So Fisher Stevens was initially hired to play the role, and he wasn't going to be white, right? He wasn't going to be brown. So this is the funniest part of it, though, to me. They let him go and brought in Bronson Pinchot to do it, and they were going to make Bronson Pinchot Indian. And the fact that they thought that was okay also just shows you, well, he's foreign, right? Yeah, we can just use him. And then Bronson couldn't do it for some reason. There was some reason he did. So they just brought back Fisher Stevens and then just, made him brown.
Yeah, so Valky from Perfect Strangers.
Yep.
So yeah, the DeBarge song is I mean, Johnny is Johnny 5, right? That's and actually I think somebody mentioned this and I haven't gone back and watched it, but the music video, I believe, actually features short circuit scenes and stuff like that in it.
They used to do that heavy, yeah, and back then.
1.3 billion Indians at that point, but no actors.
A whole industry and a whole
Yeah, right.
cinematic industry to boot.
Yeah. But I will say on the foreigner thing, I mean, we've seen this a lot in movies so far in the 80s. I mean, we have seen other instances of brown face. There's quite a bit of it in Rambo 3. But, there's quite a bit of just like, oh, well, this person's German, like make them Russian or all of these kind of things where it's just like it doesn't matter that much. These are, we can just make people whatever we want. We're America.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So this was a good question, Mtume. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this. When was the turn from focus groups to test audience movie making?
So the focus group stuff comes heavily from industrial films first. So there was like a whole series of time, I think, from really starting in the 50s and the 60s, going to the 70s, where there were films made particularly for industries, right? And this was like a kind of a thought creation. Movies like The Secret to Selling the Negro is like one of those films, and they were specifically made for industries. In the 70s, there began to be the idea of audience testing that kind of came from that. It started to I think they were saying like the mid to late 70s, but by the 80s it was a core function. It was like a core function of the 80s. I mean, there's movies like the ending of Fatal Attraction, which we should do, was actually changed because of audience response. I mean, the funny thing
First
with that
Blood.
one, it First
Yeah.
Blood, right, is one, but yeah, the big one with Fatal Attraction is in the original one, she kills herself and he goes to jail, Michael Douglas. And the women, mainly they said married women, weren't into this idea of that. So that's when then they changed the ending to Anne Archer basically killing her, which is like some deep shit. Glenn Close hates that. She thought it was really fucked up. It's I mean, we got to do that movie because we could definitely have a big discussion about that. But yeah, that's like a big one. But the 80s is where it really gets solidified. But it comes from this kind of nexus to like focus group things that were happening heavily in the 70s and then with test audiences. But like in the 70s, but in the 80s, it's like a mainstay.
This is a good comment. I'm curious if the juxtaposition of military versus animal lover free spirit is also some kind of trope. Yeah, I mean, I think so. Like, I saw one thing that referenced her character just as an animal lover pacifist, right? Which is nonsensical in some sense in the movie because she's actually the one trying to get Johnny to kill things.
Yeah.
But yeah.
There's also the what's that film with Broderick, the other one, with the monk, Project X, Helen Hunt, right? And she like loses her I forgot what kind of AP is. Like, like she loses her and he gets into the military thing. He gets caught in the military. So she has this like core function and of being like the animal lover, right? And Broderick is just kind of the guy who's working there, right? I loved that movie when I was a kid, right? So, but then the military, oh God, I was so into Project
I
X. It
don't think
was
I've
like,
seen it.
oh gosh, I was like obsessed with that movie. It was like, like kid crying when they get away and shit at the end of the movie. It's so like, yeah, yeah. But that was one that I watched a lot.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Initially, Gutenberg's character was teaching the robot piano, and his general laid backness, I thought, was trying to paint him as an anti-military scientist. Yeah, I mean, he just wants to do cool science stuff with robots. He doesn't want to have anything to do with it.
Hmm.
The modern day version of this is I work at Palantir so I can retire early thanks to Fire Reddit community and work for a nonprofit doing good. Yeah. Um, let's see. Thank you, Brittany. So this is where when we talked about act of God. So actually, when force majeure gets
Force
listed, that
majeure.
it's one of it's which is like superior force, but like
Hmm.
within the clauses that sort of um, create a force majeure is a so-called act of God, right? And the idea behind it is that the contract is no longer valid because it cannot be there's nothing you can do basically to fulfill the terms of it essentially.
Hmm.
um this is another thing that we had. Shout out to some folks in Philly who have been fucking these delivery robots up actually. And so yeah. um all right, let's see. This is true. Nothing could compete with Transformers. We gotta get to some Transformers stuff because Transformers owned the toy market for sure.
Yeah, shout out to Hiram. I saw him last week. He's like, when you doing Transformers and GI Joe, y'all. Hiram,
Yeah, we gotta
Hiram,
get to it.
Hiram made a request, so
We gotta get to it. Perfect Strangers is in the same Die Hard universe because the cop from Family Matters is in both. Carl Winslow. All right, so next week we do have Jay Mufwad Paul is going to join us, and we're going to do Videodrome, which is
Mm,
different than pretty much anything that we've done so far.
yeah,
It is. I'll just prep people who might want to watch it. It is body horror. There's a lot of sexual exploitation stuff and things like that in the film. So it might not be for everybody,
yeah.
but it is in a lot of ways more interesting than a lot of, because obviously there's a lot of critique within the film as well.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if you have anything you want to say about it before
Yeah, I
we
mean, it's a
end.
film that I've always quite dug on many levels. Cronenberg is interesting if you begin to parse out, and we'll talk about it next week, his, I guess, studies or investigations around desire. In some movies, they work better. In some movies, they don't work at all. Um, but this film is really interesting, and then it also will be very interesting. This film, what it kind of talks about, like the social world, but of course, its lead character being one of the most right, right wing people we have in Hollywood. James Woods, I think, is also a very interesting fact. But the film, yeah, I mean, there's a lot, and I'm excited to talk about it. It's definitely a real, like, ooh, there's a whole lot there, right? And the kind of 80s mentality, and also some interesting like Canadian stuff too, which I'm sure um to talk about in terms of like uh television, closed circuit television. There's a lot of like really interesting shit with that. So it's gonna be really fascinating.
Yeah, and JMP is from Toronto, so the same city as Cronenberg, and where it's all filmed too.
Yeah.
And it's interesting in respect because Cronenberg does go on to do a lot of Hollywood films,
Yeah.
but this is the first one where he got any they did distribution for it basically. It's still
Mm-hmm.
a very low budget film, but this is kind of like the start of his relationship with Hollywood, which is
Mm.
interesting to talk about because
Yeah.
he's definitely more of an outsider to the Hollywood system, even though he got a lot of films that were eventually
Mm-hmm.
made and supported through Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, James Wood left MAGA because it wasn't right wing enough. Yeah, it's wild. And it's not the first movie we've done with James Wood. He was in Badge of the Assassin that we did
Yep.
with Orson Burton.
Yep.
And there's others that we will probably have to do, like
Mm.
Salvador.
Mm-hmm.
Just an
Mm-hmm.
interesting
Yeah.
career in
Blondie
the
is
80s.
also in this movie. Homegirl. Debbie Harry, right? It's also in this movie, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Interesting cast, Yeah.
yeah. So, anyways, that'll be an interesting one to check out
Yeah.
and to talk about, and look forward to chopping it up with JMP to get. I'm sure he'll have a lot of good
Yeah.
commentary on it as well.
Yeah, I can't wait. It's gonna be real
So,
fun.
yeah. What do you I know you put out a thing, you're doing like one episode
Yeah, for
a
this
month
month.
this
Yeah,
month?
yeah. This month we just had up with I don't know if people checked out my episode with Lara Shihai. That was great, really good talking with her. That was like awesome. And please check that out if you haven't. I have an episode coming up for next month. With me and Steven Osuna. We're gonna record soon about memories of underdevelopment. I'm gonna start doing a lot more stuff on Cuban cinema, which is going to be really, 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 really fun. And I think vital also now to kind of get insights on Cuba from their own filmmakers. They have, historically a robust cinematic system theoretically and practically. So that's going to be really fun. That should be the beginning of next month. Um, yeah, I was
You were on
also
Struggle
on
Session yesterday?
yeah,
Yeah.
about to say, yeah, check out if you didn't check out with Adnan Hussein, Amberine Boy, and Karina Mullen. That was great to be in conversation with the three of them. Really honored, and yeah, so that's happening. But yeah, but I'm finishing school, so that's why I have to finishing the semester is like the worst. So this next 2 months will be a little bit more sparse and within our gates, but I still got something for you once a month. But once I'm out of that, we getting into it. Got some really interesting things coming up that I won't say a whole lot about just yet. Gotta like confirm a few things, but some interesting like texts that I've discovered, some interesting work that I want to kind of like throw out there. That's really, 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 really fascinating to talk about.
Awesome. And
Mm.
I do want to say I put it up on the schedule officially for May the 4th, our May the 4th be with you episode. Samantha Youssef will be returning to do Return of the Jedi. So I'm excited about that.
Hmm.
Hopefully we can get into some fights with some Star Wars nerds on that day. And
Let's do it. I'll probably be ragging on the Ewoks.
One other thing we haven't talked about on the show, I'll just say before we close out, is we did that. Somebody asked us the comment or the question about like, what do we think about one battle after another? And we, obviously this was totally like spur of the moment and all of that. And you had done a previous conversation on bad faith
Yeah.
and all of that. But it was hilarious. Like, so I clipped it and made it a separate, like,
Oh gosh, yeah.
whatever, 15-20 minute, you know, thing. And not only did more people watch it than ever watch the Imperial 80s, but we got so many comments and people were so mad at us. It was
For that
hilarious. Like people.
movie, for that movie, it's like, but I gotta say, man, I've noticed this. Like, if you hit certain touchstones culturally that are like really celebrated, people really get juvenile and angry. It's really just like it's kind of hilarious, right? You're just like, okay, dude, like, and I did a little comment engaging. I mainly don't do it because I mostly don't have time, It's just like it's like a big time thing for me. But like I had to do a couple there, but after a certain point, I was like, all right, I'm good, y'all. This is just a waste of my time. Actually, what you're asking, Jay and I already said, right? Like we actually already said it. So just,
It was just hilarious. I mean, because it was
with
like
it.
one of the like there were so many responses, and I get it. Like people don't watch us at all; they don't know
No.
anything about. They just see this one thing, and it's probably put on their like YouTube feed, and they're like, "Oh!" And I did put some, clickbaity like title on it, like we take
As you
down
should.
OBA,
As you should. As you should. They made us
and
suffer to watch that movie. I'm gonna clickbait it. Fuck it. To make
yeah.
some shit for our own.
Yeah, but it was funny because I mean, obviously you get just liberals, right, who are just like, oh, like, then you do get some we did get some leftists who are like more whatever. Like there's people who really love the book. What is it, Vineland or whatever? I can't remember.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
that book has a lot of purchase with people.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
I've
but I
read
mean
pieces of it, but not really.
that point, like, I don't know. I mean, I haven't read the book, so I can't judge that. But also, like, a movie does have to stand on its own merits. Like, like you can't just say like, oh, well, they made a movie off this great book. Like, I don't know. I didn't evaluate the book.
Yeah.
um, I probably would have critiques of that too, but maybe not as forceful. But you know,
And it
um,
functionally changes the book in, like, massive ways, like, even from the actual time period. So
yeah, yeah. Um, but it was also just funny because there were people like, go back to watching Rambo or whatever, like you know, and it's hilarious because it's like, yeah, well, we do that here. It's true. Although the
yes.
purpose is not because we love those movies or
No,
think that they're
because we're
great.
telling people these things are awful and you should hate them. Well, no, they get mad, but then no, but then there is the critique that exists amongst these kind of second cinema art film people that one battle after another could never be as bad as Rambo. So actually doing that, you're doing a kind of like dishonest project. And I just reject that concept, which is why I think it's gonna be interesting to maybe do more. I mean, the idea of the art film in the 80s is a little weird, but films that weren't necessarily blockbusters, doing a little bit more of those could be interesting within the Imperial 80s because you also begin to see the kind of while some of these things might have like qualitative, like better kind of engagement, they also like kind of like sometimes not all of them, and some of them are really quite good. They also could, traffic in the same concepts, right? And the same ideas, or when they do challenge them, what actually was it about it that actually challenged it and made it different?
Yeah, and this was part of what we said. Like we just like,
Yeah.
I don't know. And it's funny, like nobody They did take issue with you saying that it was bad on all levels. Like some people took issue with that. Like they were like, "Oh, there's good this or good that." Like cinematography is nice, like this kind of stuff. But what was interesting is not very many people, if any, that I can remember in the comments. I get it, it's comments, whatever,
Mm,
but like
mhm.
really substantively engaged with like our actual critiques, right?
No.
Or the issues that we had with the representations,
Mhm.
particularly Tiana Taylor's character, right? Who's supposed to be, well, not supposed to be Asada, but has talked about, Asada being like who she
Yeah.
studied to do the role and that kind of stuff. And then obviously also with her daughter in the movie and that whole thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
But
Yeah, and
yeah.
to the thing, this is I said it in the comments. I was like, I don't think people have a real understanding of how to evaluate cinematography or technical things because praising something's technical prowess as good because it was technically well done is a comment more about industry capability and not about execution of a movie because that just means he had good technicians. Like the cinematography for me was largely just expensive. Like it didn't functionally, it didn't do anything for me, and it didn't really help the story. It was often incongruent. The shot language didn't really match what would needed to happen. It was chaotic. Like, okay, I got to see Benicio del Toro in a oneer for I guess like it was like a 10-minute oneer. That means you just got a lot of money. Like that's like honestly, like some people don't understand about movies. Like honestly, it's not hard to do that. Doing oneers are not hard. You just need money and massive amounts of people. They're not hard, right? People go to school for this shit, right? It's like you can't. I'm not gonna praise cash, you know. Like it's what it is, right? I mean, if I do meet the guy who did the oneer, I'm gonna be saying, well, that guy's a really good technician. But like the movie sucks. So the cinematography is yeah, okay, he has great technicians. Fine. It's good to know. I don't know what that means though. It's just dumb. It's just dumb. Yeah, Triumph of Will had great cinematography too, which exactly the point. It's
Yeah.
exactly the point. You
Yeah,
know.
I mean, and I think the budget point is really important because also, just thinking about the work that you do and that others do, right, who are making films, trying to get across politics through the films and so on and so forth. Like one of the things that you're not going to be able to do is to compete in terms of budget on the technicals. Like you're not going to be able to get,
Yeah.
you
I
know?
was gonna I was gonna throw something spicy in here, and I'm now that I brought it up. Well, I don't know if people have seen Boots Riley's really recent comment of why he works with the Ellisons, and he says because
Mm.
who else is gonna give me $20 million to make a movie? And I guess yeah, I will say it. To my response to Boots is if he ever watches something like that, why do you need $20 million to make a movie? I don't have $20 million. I made my movie for I think 50. You don't need that. Like this is not a thing of a need. That's a very interesting mentality to have as a benchmark to how to, of need for a movie. So yeah, it's interesting. There's like conversation happening out there about this comment that he works with the Ellisons, Annapurna, co-founded and co-owned by Megan Ellison, the daughter of Larry. Larry's the father, right? Larry Ellison.
Mm.
So
I did not
you
know that.
know, yeah, someone
I
wrote
mean,
a very
I
they made a very like they made a tweet that was very just kind of straight out about it, and he had a response to it, basically kind of like in defense of himself. And
yeah.
I don't I don't know, there's a whole lot of things we can get there, but you know,
Yeah, I mean, I know that he would have a discussion, and part of I think I don't want to put words in his mouth, of course. Part of his argument would be some form of, yeah, M2 but your movie is not going to hit X million number of people, and I'm trying to get a message across, and
right.
so there is that there is that debate about scale and popularity and like
Mhm.
what do those things do and mean and all of that. But he has, I mean, his last series, I'm a Virgo, of course, was Amazon, right?
Mhm.
And he uses the argument for that one of basically, what good capitalist corporation am I going to work with in order to make my films? There isn't one, essentially, right? And so, yeah, I mean, there's an interesting whole discussion and debate to be had around, all of that, really.
Right. I mean, and then I guess the only thing I would then counter that comment with is, so is film only possible through a capitalist mode of production that is functioned through the Hollywood system? And I would say, what would you then say to people like Gattino, Solanas, Goverocha, who would all the third cinema people, Osman Semben, Jabril Diop Mambete, Sarah Maldoror, the list goes on, who functionally said that kind of position is actually not good for any kind of revolutionary cinema. So I'd be curious his response literally to that question, actually,
Yeah.
because
I
the
would,
literature is there. I would love his response. I just want to hear what he has to say.
yeah,
Tomas Gutierrez Alea. I was wondering what he would say to that particular position.
yeah. No, totally. And I would be interested to hear what he has to say to it too.
Yeah. Yeah.
We got to figure out how to get the two of you into a discussion somehow.
I love it. Look, I love it. I would love to talk to him about it. I would love to hear his response, and I give the position and see what he has to say. I'd be curious to hear his response, you know,
Yeah.
and I give
Yeah,
my
for sure.
response as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, man.
All
This
right.
was really good.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. See
Yeah,
y'all
so
next
next
week.
next week Videodrome, and then the week after that
Long live the
we
new
have
flesh. I love that line. It's wild. It's
then
wild
Return of the
movie.
Jedi. All right.
Yeah.
Peace everybody. Have a good week.
Peace.